Good morning, everyone, or at least it is morning here, and good day to all of you. Costa, I want to thank you and your entire team for the opportunity to do this event. Through your dedication and tutelage and mentoring, we have been able to bring people together worldwide in an effort to continue the dialogues that we have been enjoying over the last several years. I would just like to throw my welcome to everybody as well. It's great to see some familiar faces and old friends in the agenda, and we look forward to the discussions today. We have a number of great panels, speakers, who throughout the day will not only inform us, but potentially do a little entertaining as well relative to what is transpiring in their part of the electric industry. As we take a look at 2020, the dynamics of this year have been very profound. Not only has it been impactful from the pandemic perspective, but also the industry itself has found many new ways to transform itself in this age of complexity and diversity, and now in moving into an arena of decarbonizing our power mix and our grid. We're seeing a number of dynamics and a number of jumps forward throughout the industry as to how we progress and take advantage of all these dynamics that are occurring. Some of the things that you're going to hear today from our speakers are going to highlight the aspects of how far we've been able to advance, even in a year of global pandemics. So I look forward to the engagement today. We want to encourage folks to ask questions, but if you're a little reluctant, the information for the speakers and the participants today is available to everybody. So if you want to go and ask some questions offline, feel free to reach out to the speakers as well. The opportunity is there for us to learn from everybody, to continue the dynamics of moving forward, and to take advantage of what we have been able to learn and build upon. So with that, I want to again welcome you. Hope everybody is being safe, taking the necessary precautions relative to your health. Wishing certainly the best to you and your families, no matter how small or how large they are. And so what we want to do next is we want to jump into our, one of our keynote speakers today. We have, as we always have annually, a representative from the International Energy Agency, taking a look at what has been, from their perspective, taking a look at what's going on relative to the global dynamics of the energy markets as we progress through a pandemic. What's going on relative to supply options, what's making our systems more resilient, certainly what's happening to demand. We've seen some tremendous discussions or dynamics going on relative to the transition to clean energy, but also what's going on with demand side expectations as well. And we look forward to Brent. We're going to give him a few minutes to kind of share with us what the world energy outlook is taking a look like. And then hopefully we'll have an opportunity to have some questions here. We've got about 45 minutes here, or maybe up to about 45 minutes, giving him the opportunity to share with us what's going on. Brent, are you out there, and can you join me on stage? Brent, great to see you again.
Nice to see you as well. Well, thanks for that very nice opportunity. Thanks for the introduction as well. And I think just to remind everyone, so I work for the World Energy Outlook in the International Energy Agency and lead the power sector analysis and modeling there. And I mean, a few points. I mean, obviously these difficult times that we're facing, we're all working remotely. This digital summit taking place. I commend Brian, Constantine, and the organizers for managing this and coming through and continuing on what's important work in these difficult times. And I think that's yeah, to address that point in particular, you know, what impacts have we been seeing of COVID-19 on the energy world? Of course, we know all too much about the health impacts going on and the impacts on the global economy, but then the impacts on energy and electricity are very significant and affecting our daily life. So in the International Energy Agency, we've made an assessment of what the impacts are, we estimate they are in 2020 across the energy landscape and within the energy world. And I mean, one area there, I mean, we're going to see that energy demand worldwide will be down about 5% in 2020, which is the largest amount in the last 70 years. So looking back since world wars, that to give you a sense of what kind of impact that is. I mean, it's the largest impact on coal, on oil, on gas that we've seen in really modern history. And electricity has not been immune from those impacts as well. The lockdown effects, the lockdowns themselves had huge impacts on the electricity sector. We saw 20% reductions in electricity demand in the first, well, immediately after lockdowns, in fact. These are in countries in Europe, but also we saw significant impacts in the United States, in China, in India, that were for the most part temporary, these strictest lockdown measures. But overall across the year, we're going to see significant reductions for electricity demand, around 5%. And then that has the impacts there across fuels is quite different, where we're seeing that, you know, renewables themselves actually are set to grow in 2020. Are sort of if anything, they've clearly been the most resilient to the effects, with new projects still coming online because of low operating costs, connection to the actual weather and resources. They're set to increase in 2020 is the only source of electricity that will increase this year. And on the other end of the spectrum, coal-fired generation has been hit very hard. It's taken the largest effect, in part because of this growing renewables, lower electricity demand, but also very low natural gas prices. And those are stemming not only from production costs in the United States, but that's expanded to markets here in Europe and also in Asia. And some of these effects will persist as we go forward, even as we emerge and recover from the pandemic, which we hope is swift and continuous. But I think we have to recognize that there is quite a bit of uncertainty about what the process will be like over the next year or two as we emerge from the pandemic. And we explored a little bit of that in the World Energy Outlook of if the pandemic is with us for longer, what kind of effects would there be? And we have to recognize that of course, the impacts on health would be the primary concern, but the global economy would also take quite a hit. And we may see that the 2020s are the lowest decade of economic growth in the last 100 years. And this is quite a staggering concern for everyone, of course, from the health side, from the economic side. And then on the energy planning side, you know, this has significant implications, this level of uncertainty going forward. So I think, I mean, for me, those are the kind of key points from the COVID-19 situation and the pandemic we've seen. Yeah. So Brian, I'm not sure if you'd like to, how we would like to break this up, but very happy to go into more detail on particular elements, but also then transition a bit to other topics, talking about local energy production, for example.
Well, Brent, let me ask you this question: Have you taken a look at the dynamics of, a number of states and countries are looking at the decarbonization requirements, and from the EIA's perspective, have you seen a demonstrable turn in that regard relative to either supply or demand options? Because obviously decarbonization not only will impact the industry from a supply perspective, but also from a demand side alternative. And so I'm just kind of curious, how is the EIA maybe geared up for monitoring that information on a going forward basis?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is, in this changing environment, we've had to adapt very quickly ourselves. There's a very strong interest in community looking for information about where we stand today, quite literally, as close to real-time information, well beyond sort of the usual grid operators or those that are looking at that kind of data all the time. But the general public and policymakers are asking us these kind of questions. In particular, how do we know how we're doing? How are things recovering? As part of that effort, and what we saw a role for the International Energy Agency was we established a kind of real-time electricity data update. So we have, at first it was on a weekly basis, and now we moved to kind of a monthly basis, where we release an accumulation of the latest data on electricity demand in particular, but also on the supply mix and how this has been changing over the course of this year. Because we saw these dramatic reductions in the periods immediately following lockdowns or during the lockdowns. But then the recovery, this was a question from policymakers, how quickly will we recover? What does that look like? What does that mean for electricity? And so we have been tracking that. Now that's I think an important part, but a bigger conversation has been around what kind of recovery packages can governments put in place to move out of the pandemic, and what kind of impacts those would have. How do we link that up with our longer term goals? So we did some analysis this year and put out a report on a sustainable recovery plan, which to try and give policymakers and other investors sort of a short checklist of the key areas that they could invest in an infrastructure that would help boost economic growth and at the same time be consistent with the clean energy transitions that we're looking for collectively. So I'm helping to short-term actions to meet the near-term need that align with longer-term goals. And we have seen various proposals. Of course, the European Green Deal is in some ways the furthest along on this front, where a massive step up in clean energy investment is a big part of that package, link up those needs from today to the long-term goals. There were some discussions in the United States at various stages on this kind of boost, along with the stimulus that was provided to most citizens in the United States earlier. We know that President-elect Biden, he's also put forward a plan to have a massive increase in investment, $2 trillion over the next 4 years. That part of that would be for the clean energy transitions going forward. So these kind of mobilizing capital now are things we're tracking and also trying to give a clear picture on where that kind of investment should be going.
Great. We've got a question here. Let's see. In your presentation, there is a part where one gets the sad feeling that we are reaching a tipping point where the efforts to reach targets is so high that we would need a radical change. Society will not be able to do this. Is this so? What will the consequences and the scenarios then be like?
Yeah, a sobering question, I think, in a sobering time. And this is certainly a concern as we look at the outlook for global CO2 emissions. I would mention that in 2020, we're set for about a 7% drop in global CO2 emissions related to the pandemic, related to all the lockdown, which is a significant step down. If you look at and in my presentation, you can see that this is a massive change in direction from the steady buildup of emissions and that steady buildup of infrastructure, which makes it very difficult to turn the ship around, if you like. That 7% reduction in 2020 is the kind of pace of reduction we would need every year to move towards a net zero pathway or a sustainable energy pathway. So it also, I think, the dramatic effects across the economy this year give you a sense of the scale of action we're talking about. These are not around the margins, a handful of choices going to low carbon technologies. This is a full-scale transition across the economy where everyone from consumers and individuals to companies, investors, and governments have a very important role to play and all need to be at the table and fully committed to this kind of transition to make sure we still have time, that we don't cross these tipping points. We certainly look to the science community on the environmental impacts and particularly the concerns about crossing an environmental tipping point. And from the best information we have, we are not there yet. So this tipping point is in the future, but there is quite a bit of uncertainty around that. And so the best we can do is take action now, concerted action rapidly, widespread. So we're not talking in 1 or 2 regions, we need around the world to make sure that if that tipping point is closer than we think, that indeed we don't cross that. And so anytime studies have come out around the cost for avoiding these kind of environmental, I would say, catastrophes or crossing these tipping points, the cost to avoid them are always much, much lower than the cost if they actually appear. So I think that that's very clear that we need to take very concerted action as soon as possible.
So what do you see as being some of the best methods for, ensuring electricity security and also dealing with, the establishment of resilient energy systems?
Thanks, Brian. Yeah, electricity security is fundamental, and I think we've even seen that much more, the importance of electricity security for modern economies this year. As we've all, or in many parts of the world, we've transitioned the way we work, the way we learn, to being more remote. Certainly in advanced economies, this has been widespread. And the power system and reliable electricity security, or reliable electricity supply, has enabled those rapid behavioral transitions and to keep economies running, to keep lives some semblance of normality for us, and to keep economies productive. So if nothing else, we certainly can see that it's more central to the global economies. That's very clear, not to mention also supporting health systems, information technology, and entertainment. And when we look forward, we see the massive transformations going on in electricity supply. So the shifts to more wind and solar PV, away from coal-fired power generation in particular. This is a very different electricity system in 10 years or 20 years. One that electricity security has some different meanings to it. Pieces of the puzzle today, such as flexibility, that are a part of the need for electricity security overall, will become very, very central. As an example, things that are minor elements, inertia concerns, those will become more central. So kind of the relative importance of electricity security concerns we know and are familiar with now, I think it's a bit of reshuffling and reprioritization of which will be the most challenging in the future. And so the elements we need to make sure that we can meet those challenges, we need markets that properly value all of these services. Electricity flexibility, we see, of course, through ancillary service markets. We're watching that very closely to make sure that the investment signals are there for the kind of scale-ups we need in the future. More flexible assets, maybe battery storage, how big of a role can demand-side response play. We need the electricity system to be much more integrated throughout all the pieces of its own puzzle. So electricity demand and supply, I think the line is already being blurred, but in the future this will be a very blurry line of whether you're a consumer, a prosumer, whether your battery storage system at your house or on the grid, how it's playing a role in the overall system. This will be very important. And so making sure the market designs are there, that these are investable, can be market-based delivered solutions is very important. Governments can set the path and set the framework, but we need companies and investors to be following in the same lines and be actively pursuing those solutions at the speed that we will need, which will be very rapid.
Great, great. Yeah, one thing that over the last 10, 15 years, we've kind of seen the growing expectations of the value of solar, wind, and the clean technologies. One of the latest entrants into this is, the development of hydrogen-based opportunities. Is the EIA, specifically looking at hydrogen to see what it can do and what benefits it brings, from a perspective of both the supply and demand, because it certainly will help to offset demand issues as well.
Yes, absolutely. And we, as the International Energy Agency, we're responding to also greater and greater interest and momentum behind hydrogen around the world, and from our member countries and our associate member countries. So this is very clearly on the energy agenda. In part, is the right kind of perspective that it's looking beyond the next 5 years, even 10 years maybe, to developing an industry that will be essential to reaching a net zero emissions energy system. Hydrogen has this potential to play a role across many sectors and in some way link the sectors together in a way that for now we still have sectors that in some ways are in silos or separate. But hydrogen can very much link them together. You can produce hydrogen from low carbon electricity from wind and solar PV, for example, and you could use that as flexibility in the power system. So you could maybe run that through gas turbines, just stay within electricity, or it could become a fuel that could be used across the landscapes of whether it's in industry or buildings or even transport. And so it's a way to decarbonize many parts of the system, and some of those are very hard to reach otherwise. So in industry, many high temperature applications are difficult to electrify. The low carbon fuel options are pretty limited, and hydrogen could open up that quite a lot. We've put, there was a landmark study from the IEA now about 1.5 years ago on hydrogen to kind of get the state of play of the technologies and these long-term opportunities. Our energy technology perspectives work looks out at 2050 and 2070 even, and the kind of innovations we would need. And the World Energy Outlook, for its part, looks at whether this is being scaled up and signals to policymakers that this needs action now over the next 10 years to drive the innovation and the actual commercialization of the low carbon industry, low carbon hydrogen industry. And as you say, both on demand and supply. So it's one thing to produce the hydrogen, but you need to make sure that there's also a market for the hydrogen. So looking at where are those first applications that make the most sense.
Okay, wonderful. An aspect that goes along with that, and certainly the dynamics of storage in general. Lithium ion has been a precursor as far as the dealing with a number of the initial startups. Hydrogen is certainly moving into the area of becoming another option. I'm just curious though, do you think that it is incumbent upon the electric industry to also take a look at the societal impacts that go along with the development of the lithium ion technology as well as hydrogen, so that we can understand the entirety of the life cycle aspects of the impacts on this? Whoops. I think we may have just lost Brent. Hopefully he will come back and join us. There he is. So
technical problem as always. But I heard the first part of the question on battery storage, so I'm happy to comment.
okay. Well, it's more about the question of, as an industry, should we also be looking at the life cycle aspects of this? Because, certainly when we take a look at the chemicals and the compounds that are necessary for developing these technologies, we have some points of consideration that some of the materials are quite hazardous. Or the collection or the mining or the milling of this is having, substantial impacts on other parts of the world. And some have even argued that it's great for part of the world to say we're decarbonized because we're doing all this wonderful stuff. But, when you take a look at the fact of the compounds that are being mined and milled are being done on the traditional methods of, smelters and huge forklifts and transportation materials, or commodities for the purposes of this, it's that dynamic of, can we really say how green we are when we're really, raising challenges, that we're going to have as an industry to deal with, just like we had to deal with nuclear historically.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the life cycle considerations will become more prominent, or only more prominent as we go forward. I think we have the very obvious layer of CO2 emissions, at the point of the emissions, so at the point source, but we have then this entire supply chain behind those activities. So there may not be, and this applies for all technologies, right? There may not be emissions at that point, but you need to think about how did it get to that point, and over the life cycle from construction and manufacturing through its life, through the end of life, we should have a full picture of that view. And batteries, so I would say that's definitely true for the industry at large, to be thinking about all of its technologies through that lens. And battery storage does give a good idea of how different it can look, because as you mentioned, it's often put in the, let's say, the low carbon technology package, and if it's paired with renewables, paired with wind or solar, then clearly it's helping to integrate directly renewable energy sources. If it's storing and discharging, let's say, coal-fired generation for whatever reason, then of course it doesn't look so low carbon. But as it's not generally an actual source of generation, but rather storing and discharging, in some way that part is less of a concern, but that life cycle to get to that point, what materials are going into it. We've seen these technologies, lithium-ion battery chemistries, where they are developed for vehicles, right? They're developed to have very dense power profiles and be light, which doesn't necessarily make sense, or is not the primary concerns for power sector applications. They can be larger and heavier, but the technology costs have come down so fast because of electric vehicles, because of mobile devices that we all have and carry around, that those costs now sort of outweigh the other considerations in some way, because in some ways it's a higher performing technology and available for cheaper. But as we go forward, I think we should keep an open mind about also low tech storage solutions. There are projects and research going on things like quite literally lifting, raising and lowering weights, heavy weights. And these kind of low tech options may look more attractive when you start to consider the entire supply chain. We're doing more and more work in this space, so we're planning a special report on critical minerals and materials for the spring of 2021 to look across the energy space at the kinds of needs we would have going forward, and a bit more to dig deeper into the supply chain issues that you mentioned. Because in particular, these rare earth elements, as one point, we know are often very difficult to mine. They are often paired with radioactive material when you mine them. So even at that point it may not be carbon emissions, but it's quite hazardous and difficult. And having a fair and just supply chain is part of having a fair and just clean energy transition.
Great. All right. One question, additional question I got for you is taking a look at what has COVID and the pandemic, what have they brought about relative to fuel pricing dynamics, but also the fact of, there's still a huge perception about the aspect of, COVID and the originations in China and the role of the Chinese in the entire industry. How is maybe this being seen or perceived in the expanse of the IEA? And do you have any thoughts on what the expectations could be for longer term impacts?
Yeah, to get to the point on the fuel price dynamics, particularly for electricity, I think the largest impact we've seen is around natural gas prices. I would say that and electricity prices themselves. So not only through lower electricity demand, but for other reasons, natural gas prices have been very low this year, near record lows in a number of markets. I mentioned the United States, but also in Europe and in Asia. And that's changing, that then has these knock-on effects for the power sector and electricity prices. Now, if we think of wholesale markets, we've had depressed electricity demand. That's a downward force on prices. We've had lower natural gas prices. That's a downward force. We've had a higher share of wind and solar and renewables in general in the mix. That's a downward pressure on wholesale prices. So where we've seen these impacts, where the lockdown measures have been the most strict and the effects on electricity have been the largest, we've also seen electricity prices, wholesale prices, in decline or sharply pushed down because of these effects. And in some ways, this gives us a glimpse into the future. If market condition or these market arrangements stay as they are, the future we will have a much larger share of renewables. In many of our scenarios, we're seeing that there's actually quite a lot of downward pressure on gas prices. Coal prices, to a smaller effect, the supply curves tend to be much more stable for coal. But with downward pressure on gas prices, more wind and solar in the systems, the overall wholesale electricity prices, we're going to see many hours of zero or even negative wholesale electricity prices in the future. We need to be thinking about how these market arrangements and structures can be stable and serve the need in those conditions. If we have zero prices on wholesale markets for a quarter of the year, a quarter of the hours in the year, which is something we see in some of the more aggressive climate scenarios, even when we're talking about 2030 or after maybe around 2035, how can the market operate with those? Those provide a lot of signals for contracts outside the market, obviously the market players themselves. Is that something that is sustainable? And this is a very active discussion around market design going on around the world. The International Energy Agency, we're a part of that discussion. How important will other streams of revenue be? Flexibility markets, possibly capacity markets and capacity payments. And so that's a very real challenge, and it brought forward, kind of made those challenges somehow more visible and more immediate for certainly policymakers and regulators currently. So among all the many things in this challenge, I think it's been somehow this window to the future. I think the second part of the question, the longer term impacts, not only from the crisis, I think we're seeing that preparations need to be made for a highly uncertain world that we're going into. I think we know that in 2030 or 2040, we know many of the assets we have now will be there. What we don't know is what the world around them will be like. Whether we're talking about the impacts of climate change itself, whether we're talking about the changing dynamic of the global economy and the nature of much more digitalized world and engagement. So I think I would put this in a basket of, this raises a kind of another layer where we've seen a lot of those uncertainties and how quickly the world can change. One aspect, just to name one of that we're looking at, that we're doing more analysis on, is on behavioral change. I think 10 months ago, 1 year ago, let's say, before the COVID-19 crisis became apparent, if you had told many people about the kind of behavioral changes we would make collectively in a matter of weeks or months, people wouldn't have believed you, for sure. But we've shown that we are dynamic, our economies are dynamic, we can adapt to the situation, and that raises these questions of how much of this behavioral change can we carry forward if they're positive for our other collective goals, whether it's clean energy transitions or addressing emissions. Can we work from home more often? Can we travel less for business? Can we walk or ride a bicycle instead of driving? I think a lot of those behavioral changes that also seemed incredible a year ago and very academic in some way now feel much more realistic.
Okay. Brent, thank you. While I ask this one more question, I do believe that there is a couple of advisory board members who would like to ask a question. So while I ask the question and you answer it, if there are any advisory board members who would like to ask Brent a question, if you could join on stage, that would be great. So the last question I have for you, Brent, is what do you see as being the long-term role of nuclear as we move forward? And what are you seeing that as the worldwide impact?
Absolutely. Nuclear power, I think, even to understand its role today is quite important. So it's the second largest low carbon source of electricity in the world today, behind only hydropower. Nuclear power in 2019 provided more low carbon generation than wind, solar, and bioenergy combined. I think this is often overlooked. If we think of advanced economies, then it's the largest source of low carbon generation. So I think acknowledging that today our overall electricity supply is quite dependent on nuclear power in many economies, starting with Europe, the United States, Japan, Korea. China is expanding very rapidly. So where we sit now is the first piece of the puzzle. And looking ahead, there's two very different trajectories. I tend to think of it in two parts of kind of a regional story. That advanced economies, like I mentioned, the United States, Japan, Korea, where you have large fleets of nuclear reactors that have been operating for decades, and in fact now are about 35 years old on average. So are approaching their original design lifetimes or needing reinvestment to continue operations. The main risk in those economies is that those additional investments needed to prolong the life and continued safe operations of nuclear power aren't made. The difficult market conditions I mentioned earlier are affecting nuclear power as well and make it more difficult to prolong those lifetimes. And that could have a huge impact over the next decade. We could see that if further lifetime extensions aren't pursued, once we take account of all the phase-out policies and decisions that have already been made, if we just focus on the upcoming decisions, you could see that nuclear power is cut in half in terms of its contribution in advanced economies in just over a decade. So this would be a substantial loss of a low-carbon source that in some ways provides a foundation, a low-carbon foundation, on which to build an overall low-carbon system. When we're adding wind and solar PV, we want to be adding it to the low-carbon base, not simply replacing another low-carbon source, which is the main risk in advanced economies. In developing economies, where in particular China is growing the most rapidly, pushing forward and completing recently new technologies. So you're seeing the first EPRs that have come online, there just recently. The first Hualong 1 came online. So new technologies there moving forward, and in terms of safety, China is set to actually be the largest nuclear power producer for electricity by 2030. So where we've had established markets are declining, developing economies are growing, China leading that way, but also continued growth in Russia. India has 7 or 8 reactors under construction now. It's taking some time to construct, but it will significantly add to the existing fleet there. The Middle East is building nuclear power. So it's sort of a tale of 2 sides here. Growth on one side, production on the other, and in total that means nuclear power will remain at around 10% of global electricity supply for at least the next decade and likely over the next 2 decades, unless new technologies like small modular reactors come online and open up new opportunities. We're seeing that as a very active space in development now, watching closely the project design, the designs that are going forward, and the first of a kind projects that are happening. That has an opportunity to change kind of the way we think about nuclear power and new projects. They don't necessarily have to be these extremely large capital investments of $10 billion or more. They can be smaller increments, can be built hopefully faster, maybe better designed and better matched for the kind of flexibility that they'll need in the future. So we're watching the space for new technologies there, but I think always keep in mind that on the renewable energy side, technologies are moving very, very rapidly, whether it's solar PV costs, onshore wind or offshore wind performance and costs. Those are changing within certainly from year to year, but over a 5 or 10 year window, those technologies are completely new and innovating very rapidly. And I think if you look at the 2 side by side, it's a much slower process for developing nuclear technologies and moving that forward. And there's a risk that the speed of change is not fast enough for the speed of change we need in the overall energy sector.
All right, well, we've only got a couple of minutes left before we move on, but can't ignore the fact that we have security issues that are also at play here. And from a perspective of the IEA, how are you guys monitoring or managing or seeing the impacts of issues relating to physical or cybersecurity issues as it relates to either demand or supply? And I know I probably haven't given you enough time to properly address that question.
No, I think I can be short on our approach here. I mean, absolutely, cybersecurity, overall electricity security as a part of the energy security picture. That's very important. So historically, it was most security discussions focused on oil. Then they extended a bit to gas. We need to make sure that when we're talking about energy security, we're talking about all the parts of the energy economy. Cybersecurity and the challenges, the potential challenges there, in particular, are a risk for electricity and maintaining electricity security. So it needs to be a very critical core element when we think about electricity security. It relates to how much the industry is digitalizing. We're seeing already, if we look at investments, for example, in grids, a significant portion of that investment today goes to digital assets. So we're talking on the order of 15 to 20% of that investment related to digital assets in the grids, which is part of this process to prepare grids for the future. Now, that will create a huge amount of data, information that needs to be managed, for one. It also increases the overall sort of surface area that could be attacked. And that's a concern that needs to be taken very seriously. If we digitalize power plants, digitalize the grids, that also often means that there are ways to communicate with those assets. And that can be, certainly has the opportunity to be used for very good things, for improving the efficiency, the overall maintenance of those assets, but also represent potential attack points. And that needs to be managed very well through advanced IT systems, and just general awareness that cybersecurity will likely be the biggest risk faced for those assets in the future rather than physical risks. So at this point, we are, I would say, scaling up our work on cybersecurity, looking to expand expertise as these industries emerge, working with industries themselves on how they're approaching it, and ensuring that this is very front and center for regulators and policymakers.
Brent, thank you very, very much for today's discussion. The information, as always, is quite informative, and we want to thank you. And hopefully next year we can get back to being face-to-face and you know, having a discussion that way. So thank you very, very much for your participation today.
Thank you, Brian. Thanks, and thanks again to you, Constantine, and the organizers for holding this great event and having the opportunity to contribute. Thank you.
Thank you. So with that, can we have Hubert, Jan, and Guillermo please join us on stage?
Good afternoon.
And I just take a moment, you know, throughout the day, on the platform, there is the section on polls. So if you have you know, some open time that you want to take a look at the questions that are being asked and offer your viewpoints on the polls, please do so. With that, Jan, welcome. Nice to see you. Why don't we just take about 30 seconds to a minute, each one of you, and have yourself introduce yourself. Hubert, why don't you go ahead and give us a start?
Hello, I'm Hubert. I'm head of the flexibility department at ENEDIS, which is a French DSO. As you may know, we operate about 95% of the French territory. So my job is to embed flexibilities throughout our processes. So that's quite a challenge. We just completed call for tenders for flexibility services for the DSO, and we are pleased to have contracted two offers. And so we will go on and kind of move forward and make that business as usual. And now our next challenge is to insert renewables in our system. We have a joint project with RTE, which is a French TSO, and basically it all boils down to planning the regional hosting schemes of renewables with flexibility. Doing so, we can save about 30% of our capex. So we will launch beginning of next year an experiment in the southwest of France, in Landes, for those who know that, which is mainly a PV region, and in the north of France, which is mainly wind farm region. So we'll do that with production curtailment, and we will challenge the economy of the production curtailment with call for tenders for flexibility services.
Okay, Hubert. We'll give you a little more time to expand on that. Right now, we just want to give Jan the opportunity to introduce himself, and then we'll go to Guillermo, and then we'll come back and we'll give you guys all the floor so you can address the questions that are being asked. Jan, good morning.
Okay, so I understand you want only an introduction, no statements. That's good.
That's right.
Okay, my name is Jan Vorink. I'm the manager, the head of the Control Centers Netherlands Department of TenneT. We operate in the Netherlands, the control centers from my department, and in Germany we have two other control centers with also for them management and, yeah, of course, and separate locations. That's it.
Wonderful. Guillermo.
Good morning, Brian, and good morning, everybody, or good afternoon already. Well, let me introduce myself. My name is Guillermo Mann. I'm the senior advisor to the president of the group of companies called Velatia. It's a family-owned group of companies. And one of the companies belonging to this group is Ormazabal, and Ormazabal is an expert in manufacturing of all type of components and services for the medium voltage distribution network. I also represent the Spanish manufacturers. I am the chairman of the Spanish Association of Manufacturers of all transmission and distribution equipments, and I'm also vice president of the European Association. And I can tell you that the whole sector today is quite excited on the challenge that we have in front of us for the digitalization of the electricity network, in order to prepare the network for the fantastic opportunities that we have in front of us for the, let's say, renewables that should be introduced in the network, for the new uses of the electricity, like the electric vehicle, etc.
Well, we look forward to hearing about those opportunities. So the panel discussion, the topic of the day is approaches and innovations on the ability to manage DSO, TSO transitions, and also dealing with the impacts of smart technologies and distributed generation. Hubert, why don't you, expound upon a little bit more what you started and share with us what you're seeing where you're located.
Okay. So like I said, for the DSO, we see flexibility as a new way to optimize our network. So I'm assume that everyone is well known about smart connections, at least the idea of smart connections. We expect a change in regulation beginning of next year, so that we can actually propose it on a normal basis to the producers. So 6 months from now, it should be normal business. Now, when it comes for inserting renewables in France, there is a scheme through which actually there is a survey of renewables projects. Based on that survey, TSO and DSO kind of design the optimal network. We plan relevant assets, and we say of our region there is maybe so many million euros to host so many gigawatts, and any producer that comes to a connection gets some kind of a share of that connection. Of that fee, regardless of the actual cost needed for the real assets that he needs. So it's a way of easing the way of connecting renewables. There is no renewables that pays more than the other. They just share an average cost. But so far we do that without any curtailing, because in France we have to connect producers at the installed capacity. What we are doing now with RTE, which is a French TSO, is designing it another way. If basically it all boils down to connecting more producers on the same transformers, because the load duration curve is not flat. It's quite steep for some renewables, and instead of using the assets a very little amount of time, that's the tip of the load duration curve, we can do a different sizing. And doing that, we may connect on the transformer 50% more than what we did before. So in some region it's 10%, some region it's 50%, depends on the load curve of producers and consumers. And when we do that, we do save 30%. So it's a whole new experiment where we, by design, have an opportunity to have more power coming to a substation than it can handle. So, of course, we have on the preventive side curtailment, and we also need to design automaton that can protect the transformers. Instead, in cases flexibility will not be reliable or will not be activated, or maybe we are wrong with our provisions. Or with our forecast, sorry. So we will start this experiment beginning of next year. We filed a provision for exemption, which is in the framework of the French law. There is you can file an exemption provision to test this experiment. It will last for a few years, so that it will give time to producers to connect and for us to test this solution, and starting 2024 or around that, we will make it normal business. So it's quite a challenge. Saving 30% on connection, on shared assets, it's quite a challenge, and producers are waiting for us.
Jan, you guys are, TenneT is doing a lot with the impacts of supply and resourcing out of the North Sea. What kind of opportunities or challenges is that presented for you as it integrates into your system?
The wind farms offshore, that is every year we want to install another one of 700 megawatts in the Netherlands. And in Germany, on average, they are around 900 megawatts now. They will grow to 2,000 megawatts per wind connection, and perhaps also combined with interconnectors. So we call that then a wind connector, likely to go to UK. So these are well-planned projects. So normally we are capable of doing all the investments in the grid onshore, that it doesn't create problems onshore. That's not completely guaranteed. In Zealand, we had a trouble with a building company that built a line too late or couldn't build it well enough. So there we have a delay. Now we have some congestions. But then we have solutions for that, and these are flexible solutions, also using renewables, and but mainly, of course, fossil fuel power plants. If we can regulate these down, then we have most of the time enough flexibility. Sometimes we have to regulate down also wind or solar. And for that we use tools. Tools are in my presentation, several of them, as congestion management, or also for balancing. We have different solutions. Part of them are based on blockchain, so that depending on the type of tool that we need. And in the next block for the discussion, Alliander and Next Kraftwerke are two of the partners with which we implement these tools. So they're actively running. So we have congestion management with the DSO, with Alliander, and balancing energy with multiple other parties, which we do mainly by blockchain or by mobile networks. So.
Now, just curious, the dynamics of the flows to the UK, are those going to be separate and distinct, so that those sites that are offshore, are they going to be dedicated to the UK grid, or do they have the flexibility of going back and forth between Europe and UK?
Yeah, that's a really good question. The answer is a little bit more complex. In principle, both is possible. The main design thing that you have to solve is how does this wind energy optimize the flows. Now let's start separately. If you have two wind farms, both located in the North Sea, halfway between the Netherlands and England, you have one connection to the Netherlands, and you have on the other side only a connection to England. This line that you build in between can help a lot, because if there is no wind, then you can use this whole interconnection to go from the one side to the other side. Or if only one has full capacity and on the other side there is more demand, you can use this one to add a little bit to the other wind farm and bring it to the other countries. So the business case of a wind connector is really, really good. The regulatory question that you put forward, to who is the wind going to be calculated, that is, if it's two wind farms, still quite easy, because then they are both in their own economic zone. Then you can still say only this part is traded. So then it's probably quite easy, but we are developing these mechanisms, and we need help from the European Commission, or probably other parties also, to get this solved. And of course, with England, with Great Britain, it's now not easy to organize things with the Brexit in combination. So in January, it's probably more clear.
Yeah.
Yeah. But you understand the business case, I think, Brian?
Oh yeah, very much so. Very much so. Yeah, we have a few dynamics over here in the North America that give us the opportunity to optimize power flows depending upon who needs it the most.
Yeah.
Particularly, the Canadian resources. There's an abundance of hydro north of the border from where we are. And if they're having the right weather conditions, and we have the load and the demand in south of the border, we've got the same type of dynamic going on. Where is it going to be the best opportunity?
Yeah, if it's country to country, then it's quite easy. But if you make something in the middle, and that would potentially be a separate market. So then you make it a price hub. So you make, let's say, a price hub North Sea. That is a potential solution for that. But country to country market coupling, that's normal process for us also. So using the optimization between all the countries in the on the continent and via the cables also with the UK and Ireland, that is normal business. But if you want to do something halfway in between and want to optimize that, then you need to do a little bit more.
Right, right. Guillermo, how are you?
Fine, and you?
From your perspective, how are you seeing the work that you guys are, your company is performing? How is it impacting or creating challenges or opportunities for your organization to deal with?
Well, to tell you the truth, I think that now we are living a situation that is quite exciting, as I said before. I mean, in my opinion, I think that is a fact that our economy is going to be more and more electrified. More and more electrified because of two facts. First of all, because we have demonstrated that the electricity is the energy vector where we can integrate more renewable energies, and there is a real political will to go for the decarbonization in Europe, and second, because this matter of the renewables embedded in the distribution network is going to the democratization of the electricity business. I mean, now every consumer can become a prosumer and can have their own, for example, photovoltaic panels at home, and can be part of the deal, can be part of the electricity business. So the matter is that in this situation, and this promising situation, I think that it's very important to prepare properly the network. The network must be properly digitalized, and the network must be properly reinforced in all means, but basically in providing intelligence in order to manage the new flows of energy and this new business that are going to be traded with the electricity. So, and the perspective of my company, and I would say all the manufacturers or all the, let's say, technology providers for the electricity network, is a very exciting situation. I mean, the technologies are ready. The technologies are basically European technologies, and I mean, the floor is there. Now we have to put the means, and we have to make the proper investments, and to have the proper incentives for the investment in this regulated market that the networks are. I think that this is a very promising situation.
Okay. Great. So, question from the audience is, Jan, we'll start with you because it was pointed to you, but we'll include Hubert and Guillermo as well. You mentioned that electric vehicles, provide flexibility. How is that impacting your circumstances, but also from the customer's perspective, what do they get in return for participating, with their electric vehicles?
Yeah, good question. No, it's of course voluntarily. The car owner can decide himself if he wants to participate in a process like that. And we have several companies in the Netherlands, balanced service providers, these are called based on the new regulations, that offer a service like that to their car owners, and they get paid for that, but it's more a symbolic payment than that it's really already amounting to large sums. But it's a technology that really can help. So they can decide when they put their car to a charging point in their app. The practice, I know with the Tesla, I know in practice how they really do it. You put in your app that you're okay if you are regulated down. So if we have an imbalance in the grid, then we just reduce the in-feed of those Teslas to a lower level or to zero. And by that, via the blockchain, we measure how much they participate, each of them, and the total volume of energy that is then provided to us by the business, the balance service provider, is then paid to the balance service provider. And those prices can run up quite high. If there is imbalance, then prices can go up to several €100 relatively fast. So at that moment, it's really nice that the cars will not be charged at that moment. And of course, they can put in a limit, a minimum limit, what they want to have their car filled up with. Most Teslas have a battery which is much bigger than the average distance that they want to drive the next day. So that gives them the possibility to decide if they have to drive far the next day, that they say, first I want to have it charged and then I participate in the mechanism, or they say, okay, I'll participate until 10, 11 in the evening, and then I'll let my car charge at home. But most of them have charging at home. So that's the way it works.
Okay. Guillermo, do you have something like this where you are?
No, not yet. I must tell you that still, at least in the countries that I know more, in the Southern Europe, we don't have enough penetration of electric vehicles to make, I mean, flexibility services through the cars. Not yet, but it's a matter that it will arrive. It will arrive, but it's a matter of time. Yeah.
Hubert?
Well, electrical vehicles are a problem and a solution. Like we said, there are flexibility providers, so they can be aggregated by aggregators that can value the flexibility on national markets. If they are in an area of local congestion, they can be aggregated to help solve the congestion. Now, when it comes to model the load curve of an electrical vehicle, it's kind of a difficult solution. We know how to model a residential customer, but electrical vehicle has a purpose by itself that may be to provide flexibility. So it kind of changes the profile of load curve of our network. And when it comes to modeling the network, how can we know how they will behave? Because they will put a charge on the network, injection or withdrawal, consumption. And so there are a solution if they play on the national markets. There may be a solution for solving local congestion, but also when they activate, they generate a synchronous load on the local network, and that may create congestions that did not exist without flexibility activation. So it's a mixed balance. We are observing how it behaves, but we don't know how to model. And on top of that, there are mobile storages. They charge at one point and discharge on another one. How do you model that? How can you give a signal so that they charge on another road, on another network? It's basically 100 meters from where they live, but when it comes to public stations, they can charge on that street, on the other one. It's not the same impact on the LV network. So it's quite a challenge.
Yes, and depending upon the battery storage technology itself, I mean, whether you take a look at hydrogen or lithium ion or whatever, you've got the challenges of the charging impacts as well as the discharging impacts. The numerical value of overall the resource capability. You have no awareness as to the opportunities or the impacts, because let's say, for example, in your situation, you decide you have an emergency situation and you discharge your batteries. Well, later on, if that battery only had a 2-hour run period, they're going to be charging that battery again, probably during the day. And what is that going to do as far as impacting the system, because now you have new load? A lot of people look at the resource, from a dynamic of, the benefits from battery storage, but I don't know if anybody has really thought about the impacts of, the fact that when those batteries had been dispensed, you got to put them back. You got to put them back into a full storage capability. So the modeling point is an excellent example of, of what's going on. What, for the three of you, have your companies started to spend more time on trying to figure out how to model all of these diverse impacts and challenges that are coming as a result of these new resources?
Yes, we actually studied in our tenders whether we would accept new charges, new sites as a response to call to solve network congestion. And as you really pointed out, when we have a local congestion, it means that the network is in constraints. So bringing in new charges is probably not a good idea per se. So, because one think of the flexibility sources as a savior when you activate it. But say if you have congestion on the consumption side, then you will ask the battery to inject electricity on the network. That's fine enough, that solves the constraint. But then the battery has to charge back. So it has charges on the network when previously you did not have congestions. So bringing a new storage in a congested area is a very tricky thing, and actually we don't think it's a good idea in general. People think that storages are the savior and a good idea in general. We kind of think the opposite. It may be a good idea, but in general, it's a very bad idea to put new charges in an already congested area to prevent investment. It's not saying they will provoke the construction of investment that you really wanted to postpone. So yeah, if you do the calculation of the load curves, that's what we figured out on a few cases.
I can react on that, perhaps.
Yeah, please do.
Guillermo first.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
Yeah, okay. First of all, until now, there is not many cars that can. You can load cars. You can stop the loading. That's possible, but there is only a few cars that can be discharged and put it in the grid. That I would see perhaps also for a DSO sometimes a little bit more as a risk. But if market forces are well developed, then normally it would work in the right direction. For instance, we use the Teslas when they are loading to stop the loading. So normally that makes the problem smaller. And we give a signal based on the new network codes, the European codes. There is an obligation for a TSO that takes a measure which has an impact in the DSO's grid, that we inform the DSOs that there are locations in his grid where we will use measures. We will have to use measures also based on the flexibility need that there will be in the electricity system. And part of these measures will be in the DSO grids. In my presentation, I analyzed the three different type of problems, challenges that we have in the grid. And for each of them, it's likely that you will need flexibility out of the DSO grids. So to Hubert, my message would be, you have to find a solution to work with that. You will probably not be capable of stopping a car owner from charging his car. And because all these car owners do it at the same moment in time, not now with COVID, but normally all when they arrive at 7 o'clock at home, and we have hundreds of thousands of electrical cars already, so they charge. That's certain. If we get a congestion because of that in a DSO grid, the DSO would be able to use GoPax as a mechanism and ask for flexibility providers to reduce the infeed there. He will have to pay the car owners a fee. And the numbers that we are paying are really limited. Car owners, electrical car owners, are environmental sensitive and sensible people, most of them at least, and they are educated, many of them. So they understand that it's in their interest not to overload the grid. And they are capable and willing to reduce the infeed. So normally it can help. So my suggestion to you would be take a more proactive approach, and we have two tools that can help you there. The one is the blockchain, where we have a platform which is internationally rolled out by TSOs. There are 4 TSOs, 10 in Germany, 10 in the Netherlands, Swissgrid and Turner, which are participating in it. It's a service to the market. It can be used then for better service providers to deliver services to the TSO or the DSO, both is possible. And that gives you the possibility to take measures in those grids where you get in trouble. Of course, I cannot solve all the problems. There will also be problems in our grid which I cannot solve with flexibility out of the DSO grids. But at least we have to try.
Yeah.
Gerald.
Yeah, let me introduce one more concept. Just imagine such a scenario that we have thousands or hundreds of thousands of users that not only have an electric vehicle and they are ready to, let's say, to provide flexibility to the system through the battery of their car, and on top of his roof they also have PV panels. In such a scenario, when we have, and this is a real example, even today in some European areas, in such a scenario, we'll have to protect the network itself. Why? Because one important fact is that most of the prosumers will feed in with let's say the production from his PV panels at the same time. And most of the prosumers will, let's say, demand electricity to charge their cars at the same time, more or less. So that means that this is going to create not only congestion, this is going to create also, let's say, problems in the stability of the system and problems, for example, in the control of the voltage level. So in this particular, I mean, when we have a lot of energy that is injected into the network, we'll have an over voltage, probably over the threshold, the maximum value, and exactly the opposite we'll have when we have a lot of cars charging their batteries. And in that sense, there are two ways to control that. The first one is just to have to limit the voltage level and to disconnect whatever is when the situation is being produced like that. The other solution is to have the network properly prepared in order to have, for example, the transformers that are intelligent enough in order to move the transformation relation in order to have the voltage in the proper levels. So that means that, okay, the network is not only copper, the network is much more than that. And this is the intelligence that I was talking from the beginning of my intervention.
So, interestingly enough, with all of this going on, this has got to be impacting the relationship between the TSOs and the DSOs, has been highlighted in this discussion. What do you see as kind of being the future aspirations of the relationship, and what are you going to need for the moving forward as we develop these technologies and these scenarios? What do you see as the impact from the DSO environments that that need to be improved upon? Anybody want to go first?
Obviously, cooperation between DSO and TSO is already occurring, but basically we will share the same pool of flexibility. So it's not a scavenge first one, first come basis. It's solving together constraints on the whole electric system and making best use of the flexibility pool. So it's a matter of planning, it's a matter of operating, it's a matter of sharing data, and that will work. Now it's kind of difficult because so far most of the flexibility markets have been designed and operating since, I believe, the beginning of any electrical system in each country for the sole purpose of the TSO. I mean, TSO was in charge of balancing. is still in charge of balancing, and historically was the sole actor or nominator for flexibility. Now DSO has to come into the play, and processes and information systems and everything has to be designed for multiple activators, and yet the same pool of flexibility. So we will work together. We already work, but we will work even more closely in the future.
Okay. Well, you mentioned the need for planning, and data collection. Are you currently experiencing any issues relating to the data that is needed for you to be able to make your planning, assessments and your modeling requirements?
Well, like I said, our most valuable case for flexibility is regional planning to host renewables. And by law, we do it with the TSO, and that's the best, that's the greatest share of the flexibility that we will activate. So we do that with the TSO. Obviously, we need to plan together.
Yeah.
Planification, in my opinion, is becoming more and more important. Well, planification is always important, but in this particular case, when we have this sophistication of the electricity system, planning of the investments and planning of everything is in my opinion, is critical.
Okay.
Perhaps then from the TSO perspective, I fully agree with Hubert. I think he made several good points there. The way that we will have to cooperate is also to find solutions for the problem of the other. So let's take the example of solar. If you have an area where you have too much solar in feed based on residential areas, then you will have a problem of getting that out of that grid. Let's say you have congestion there, you have to regulate down, so you will need the flexibility downwards. But somewhere you need to find upward flexibility. Most of the time within that same DSO grid, there is not a solution. Now you are such a big DSO that you probably have somewhere else a solution, but solar seems to shine in France many times on a lot of locations at the same time. Then there will be more areas with problems of congestion and more areas where you need to regulate downwards. And then it is probably in the TSO grid or in another DSO's grid that you will have to find the upward potential to balance that congestion, the downward congestion regulation that you did. And there we will need to help each other. That's otherwise not possible to solve it. You need grids of others over which you do the transport. So you need to have possibilities to define if that's potentially feasible or not. That is planning partly, but it's in real time always different than in planning. At least that's my experience. So in those types of situations, we will need to shake hands and come together and find one tool. The tool that Paul de Wit is talking about, and which is in my presentation, is called GOBEX, Grid Operators Platform for Congestion Management. And that works. So it is using downward and upward bits on an exchange, on a power exchange with locational information together with it. I have a very simplified slide in my presentation on that. And Paul is also going to tell something about it. But it doesn't solve everything. Balancing it doesn't do. So if you really need downward reserves like AFRR or upward reserves like AFRR, then you need something like a real-time measurement mechanism, and then you can use blockchain or the mobile network solutions that we have in place. We use it now on hundreds of flexibility devices, and we ask always the regional grid operator if it creates problems, and we hardly had never a complaint of a regional grid operator, because normally you regulate in the same direction in which the DSO would like it to be regulated. And it reduces the consumption, or so normally it works in the same direction.
Wonderful. Gentlemen, unfortunately, we have run out of time for this panel. I want to extend my appreciation. Hubert, Jan, Guillermo, thank you very, very much for your participation today. Hopefully next year we can do this a little face to face and probably enjoy a few pilsners as well. So thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Bye-bye, everybody.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Rebecca, Mark, Paul, and Alexandra, if you are out there, could you please join us on stage? Wonderful. Looks like we have everybody here. Good day, everybody.
Good day.
Hello. Hello.
All right. So what we want to try to do here first is just have everybody go through and just momentarily introduce yourselves so that people can gain a little bit more familiarity. I know some of you are diehard participants to our conference in the past, but it's always good to make sure that, for the new folks that are out there listening in, everybody gets a little bit of an opportunity to know who you are. So if you could just take a moment or two and briefly introduce yourselves and your company, that would be great. Rebecca, we'll start with you.
Great. Thanks so much, Brian. My name is Rebecca. I am the commercial lead for Electron, which is building the flexible marketplace platform that enables grid operators to interact and connect with distributed energy resources. In the presentation that I gave yesterday, we talked about a few of the trials that we've implemented across the UK and Canada. So I'm looking forward to talking about those in more detail here.
Great. Thank you. Mark, your turn.
Hi, Brian. Good to see you again. My name is Mark Hossel. Been around in the smart metering world for about 20 years. So since the early days of, I would say, smart metering. I'm talking on behalf of the OGP Alliance, Open Smart Grid Protocol Alliance, representing about 60 utilities in Europe using that protocol, and representing NES Corporation, one of the suppliers of the smart grid systems, starting from smart metering. And I'll come back to that later.
Great, thank you. Good morning, Paul. Welcome.
Good morning, thank you. My name is Paul de Wit. I work for Alliander. Alliander is a Dutch distribution system operator. I'm a senior advisor regulatory affairs. And in the Netherlands, I've worked on the congestion management legislation. It was a huge task. I'm also participating in a lot of European groups. I also am involved in the implementing act for data access and interoperability, but also in the preparations for the network code on flexibility. And I'm chairing the Euroelectric Working Group on Institutional Frameworks. My presentation was on the evolving role of DSOs and the interactions with citizen energy communities. The presentation is how we think we can help citizens energy community, and we have developed an IT platform enabling those communities for that.
Great, thank you, Paul. We'll give you an opportunity to expound on that here in a few minutes. Alexandra, welcome.
Yes, hello everyone. My name is Alexandra Radwanska. I am the International Business Development Manager at Next Kraftwerke, which is the German company, which in 8 European countries is the operator of the virtual power plant, which means that we cooperate with independent power producers and trade their electricity on the wholesale market. But also we deliver ancillary services such as, in fact, frequency balancing services with distributed generation such as hydropower plants, batteries, biogas facilities, but also with emerging technologies such as electric vehicles and electrolyzers. And on the other hand, and this is where I work at Next Kraftwerke, we are also the global VPP platform provider, which means that with our infrastructure, with our software, we enable other companies to establish their own virtual power plants, also beyond Europe. And I will be very happy also to discuss here on this panel about these technology, about emerging technologies.
Wonderful, thank you, Alexandra. So The topic of this panel is implementing new smart grid technologies and the successes and challenges. So why don't we just go around, and we'll start again at the beginning with Rebecca. Rebecca, why don't you, kind of do a little bit more about, highlighting where you've seen, your success, but also kind of indicate where you've seen some challenges or limitations that may prove to be beneficial down the road. There we go.
That's a great question. So I'd say to start off with, the first challenge that we faced this year was we had been implementing a customer demand response program with a grid operator in London, Ontario, Canada. This is meant to allow them to interact with customers, use price-based signals to develop a peak shaving program and improve system reliability and security. Obviously, in the midst of a COVID pandemic, the actual rollout of a customer program that requires hardware integration is a little bit trickier. So that has impacted some of the timelines around the learnings that we are able to generate from that pilot. However, in the other market-based pilot that we have in Orkney in the Scottish Islands in northern UK, that hasn't been an issue because customer integration was already implemented on the hardware side, sort of prior to COVID. So we haven't faced that issue. I would say that the main issue on that side, and what is likely to be an issue for a lot of the viewers here, is the balance between trying to get an efficient operation of the grid using a market-based mechanism and ensuring system reliability is often viewed as a conflict, or might be perceived as a conflict by grid operators. Obviously, in our role, we don't see those things as in conflict. We see those as possibly complementary, which is how we implemented the system in Orkney on the back of an active network management system, but allowing trading between distributed energy assets in a local region. So I think the biggest challenge for us moving forward as an industry is to understand that you can have efficient operation of grid and engagement with consumers, but it doesn't necessarily need to be viewed as indirect conflict or directly impacting the ability of a network operator to safely and reliably balance their own grid.
Great. Thank you, Rebecca. Mark, your thoughts, please.
Well, yeah, interesting. I think in this world of the energy transition, the biggest challenge is to get utilities, specifically DSOs, to really understand that the energy transition is changing the dynamics of the low voltage grid. Even the previous presentation that was about this topic, but still, I see many utilities, DSOs, sourcing technology, buying smart meters, without basically realizing what the impact of the changes are and how fast they will happen. So the challenge to me is, first of all, let utilities, DSOs, start with the vision on how the world will look 3 years, 5 years, 10 years from now. And basically any sourcing they do should be basically aligned with that near future. Now, it doesn't happen. And one of the reasons is people underestimate the speed of change, while wind farms, the electric vehicles, the solar panels are ramping up quite fast and causing trouble today for many DSOs. Most DSOs, even in the so-called sophisticated Western European world, don't have proper insight in the grid. They don't know on the low voltage grid the dynamics, they don't measure voltages, they don't have a proper topology information, which basically causes them to sort of be blind on what's happening. And we see that even in some countries where they need to say, stop, you cannot feed in anymore, or stop, you cannot start up your data center because we cannot supply you any more energy. So they're surprised. And on the contrary, at the same time, European Commission with the Clean Energy Package is enforcing the DSOs to provide the communities, the end users, the consumers, the right to request dynamic pricing, to request feed-in capability, to even own a distribution network. And the DSOs need to just provide the proper service level, and they're by far not able to do so. So the challenge is on that side, let them basically do the missionary work on this matter, but at the same time being hindered by the regulators who basically still allow tariffs for investments and so on, and budgets, which are basically from the old world and not for the current world and what they need to do to be ready for that very near time. So that is a challenge. There are successes as well. We do see some utilities who basically take advantage using the smart meters as sensors in the network, knowing what's going on, really start to understand, and as well make the change internally to let the smart meter department or the meter department be responsible for grid operations in the low voltage grid and break the barrier between the SCADA people, the medium voltage people, and the low voltage people who normally don't talk to each other for historical reasons. But that needs to be linked to each other as well, because the world is changing and the dynamics of the grid are changing with the focus on the secondary transformer, the low voltage grid. So yeah, success and challenges. And again, to me, it starts with having a vision. And if you agree on the vision and you want to get there, you'll figure out how to get there. And then, yeah, my last remark on new technologies. People focus too much on low-level technologies and choices, and can spend a lot of time while they should basically focus on an architecture which allows them to take advantage of any new technology and integrating anything, while they basically, in many cases, based on history, focus too much on the technology discussion on the lowest level. And we know that any technology, any standard is superseded in a few years. So start with an architecture which supports that vision and allows you to adopt new technology.
Great. Thank you, Mark. Paul, your thoughts? Oh, you're muted, Paul. There we go.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So successes and challenges for implementing new smart grid technologies. I think one of the successes in the past years was certainly cooperation with TSOs. We've done a lot on that. I think Jan also mentioned a lot of that. We developed the GoPax platform for shared resources for buying and for buying services on a shared platform between the TSOs and DSOs. Also, of course, we're supporting the energy communities with the Entrance platform. And specifically to congestion management, I think one of the challenges we definitely have, as Mark also said, was that we have a lot of integration of renewables. That's quite problematic because, of course, it depends a lot on the subsidies that are provided, but also the reinforcement of the grid. You need the permits, which takes a long time, so it's not always, certainly not always the reason why the DSO is not doing his job or whatever, but it's also getting the right permits, which is taking a very long time. Also, the labor force it's difficult to get enough labor force for it, of course. So that are certainly the challenges. A success is that we already start with congestion management in a certain area, and that not as a pilot project, but as a real solution for not postponing the reinforcement, but to overcome the time needed for the reinforcement of the grid. So that's definitely one of the successes. Also, challenges mentioned by Mark is that we, for using the smart meters as sensors in the grid, it's becoming more and more a reality. But the difficulty is to strike a good balance with the privacy rules, which is also very important, of course, the privacy of the customers. So that is also a topic which is important for us.
Great. Paul, thank you. Alexandra.
It's very interesting that both Paul and on the previous panel, Jan mentioned the delivery of AFR, which is a frequency restoration reserve with electric vehicles, because also that's one of the success projects that Nextkraftwerke participated in. In fact, in a consortium with a company managing the vehicle owners and facilitating the channel of communication with the vehicle owners, 2 months ago we closed the demonstration project with TenneT, with transmission system operator, to actually deliver this AFR with the electric vehicles, which I really think can be called as a very big success, and also a very nice step, a very good demonstration that can be rolled out to different areas, in my opinion, also taking into account the growth, right, of adoption of electric vehicles. And one other thing which is also connected with how to make grids more flexible, how to also anticipate maybe some problems, to how to proactively offer the flexibility. Here, it's also worth to keep in mind that such technologies as virtual power plants that in fact enable live monitoring, also live steering, can support making the grid smarter. Per se, of course, they are not smart grid technologies, right? Because they are not measuring congestion on the lines, but in any way they allow to manage thousands of assets and to anticipate the problems that may happen in the near future. So also while integrating the renewables, say prosumer solar installations, but also ground-mounted installations, and the electrolyzers, the run-on the river hydro, that's also quite a good, well, 10-year-old success story that we can point out, which happened in the European Union.
Great. Alexander, wonderful. So let me ask this question based upon this. Are you seeing participation from the various classes, residential, commercial, industrial, or is it flat across the board? Is there some classes of customers participating more than others? Where do you see in smart grid movements the efforts predominantly happening? And I recognize that some of you are DER aggregators, but the aspect seems like it should probably follow along some of the classes of customers. So Rebecca, how about for you? Are you seeing any differences from classes of customers participating in smart grid?
Yeah, I mean, initially, obviously, I&C customers were kind of the focus of aggregator portfolios, I think. This is probably more so just to do with, economies of scale initially. I don't think, though, that means that consumers are less engaged. Obviously, in the UK, we've just banned the sale of ICE vehicles sort of post 2030. So whether or not they're engaged, uptake of EVs is going to ensure that they are participating in either creating a problem or a solution in the future. So it's probably not fair to say that they won't be a part of how we need to think about managing the grid going forward. Increasingly, as these devices become IoT connected, I think that's going to just be an inevitability. So I would say initial focus for portfolios, industrial scale, probably not true going forward. And especially going forward now that we have technologies that allow us to manage and interact with consumers, at a domestic level without the same economies as before, that's certainly going to change the way services are developed and grid services are provided. The project that we have in London, Ontario, has certainly seen this as the case. So the portfolio started out with industrial users, but there are definite benefits to including consumers in the way that London Hydro is engaging with the end customer, who are their customers, right? They're seeing high solar PV uptake, and so creating a way to have a peak saving or demand response program for their customers automatically creates a way for them to see consumer output, to create better forecasting and monitoring, and just a better way to engage proactively with consumers rather than creating problems. So I think that there are a lot of compelling reasons why we're going to see in the future more economic benefits from engaging with domestic consumers, and also lower costs of doing so. And that's certainly one of the things that we are addressing in the way that we are designing markets going forward.
Great, great. Mark?
Yeah, I would say that more than classes of consumers or industry, it's more a matter of countries where things move faster or slower. And that has to do, of course, with political choices made in the energy transition. And that causes trouble as well. While DSOs normally have a long span of control and planning, a dozen years or 20 years for planning your infrastructure is normal. However, like we've seen in some countries, and Paul, the Netherlands is a nice example, if the political choice is to subsidize wind farms or alternate sources, then the network was not planned for that rapid extension of generation capacity in specific areas, causing trouble. So it's more the subsidizing of certain elements which drives it, and the political choices being made. Now, along this growth of more decentralized energy generation and storage comes security, another topic in this half hour. Security concerns, and that's where we focus a lot on intrusion detection, knowing that you do whatever you can to stop, let's say, raise the wall for security, but then knowing that one day it will happen, that while more and more devices, not dozens, but millions of devices are interconnected, then intrusion detection is now, let's say, the key issue to find out, based on algorithms, the likelihood that somebody is trying to hack the system, to enter the system. And I think that's the next play, the level where the game will be played. Identify when somebody's trying before they basically succeed getting into the system.
Okay. Paul. Paul, you're muted.
I'm mute. Yeah, I'm now muted. Yeah. Well, for us, it is of course much more, of course, congestion, not so much balancing. Balancing is much more done for the TSO, and they can use the electrical vehicles for that. But for us, for congestion management, we are mainly looking in the first place to the producers. Either the wind farms or the solar PV parks. If we can top off the peak in-feed of that could help a lot. And also that is in the clean energy package, the 5% rule is helpful with that. And that's mainly for production. If we look at the consumption, it's mainly the larger connections that are mostly interested in that, in working with us, like supermarkets or hotels or that kind of customers. It's not so much that we look for congestion management at the consumers in the grid. So that's the main target that we look for solving congestions in our grid.
Okay, Alexandra.
Yeah, coming to the original question, which classes or which types of consumers are more engaging, I would second Rebecca that of course it's more CNI consumers. Nevertheless, there's also a lot of technology being developed, a lot of innovation that should and technically is in fact capable of motivating or making the engagement of residential consumers. But what I think is that it's limiting this engagement, and this is what I observe in my daily work as the business development manager, is that I get acquainted with a lot of companies who like to start a virtual power plant with, for example, prosumers or residential consumers. But the biggest problem is that it's usually not really economically feasible. So it's very remarkable for me that I observe that even if technology can enable us to do that, the business case is not simply there. And what I would like to bring here, because it's a European summit, but recently I was participating in a webinar organized by an North American consulting firm, where I heard an expression which really surprised me, is prices to devices. So they were suggesting that in the US, every kind of device, every kind of consumer, every kind of prosumer should obtain different price that responds to their profile of consumption, time of electricity consumption or generation, which is very interesting to me. And looking at the fact that for many years already, they have had, for example, in PJM region, the nodal pricing system. I'm also wondering whether it's not the technology, but the economics that is hindering us from making the grid smarter, right? Whether Europe also would need the nodal pricing system. That is, in fact, the question mark that I would like to, a question that I would like to pose here. Because, of course, as aggregator, as the virtual power plant, we cannot answer this question. But that's a very interesting thought to focus on, in my opinion, if we really would like to drive the development of the renewables and really the engagement of prosumers, not only the big ones who have the financial incentive, but also of the residential smaller ones.
Well, unfortunately, we have run out of time. And I think that the whole discussion has been so dynamic that unfortunately we can't progress any further. But I really want to thank the four of you for enlightening us with what is currently going on within your organizations. I think that there is a profound opportunity here to move forward, certainly in light of the fact that customers tend to move with the ages. Sometimes, though, they get a little lost. So having organizations like yours around to help them will keep them focused and keep them involved. And hopefully the industry, the utilities themselves will be responsive to organizations like yours to recognize the opportunities and the value that can be enhanced by cooperating with one another. Because, if the utilities can figure out ways to utilize the services that you are bringing, to the customer's benefit, then it provides for a longer opportunity for the customers and the utilities. So, thank you. And with that, Rebecca, Mark, Alexandra, and Paul, we appreciate this very, very much. So, hopefully, what we will do is look to carry this discussion forward and hopefully have you participate in more of a dialogue down the road. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
And Marco, Diana, and Alicia Medina, would you please join me on stage?
Hello, Brian. Hi, everybody.
Hello.
Hello, everybody.
All right, looks like we've got everybody. Diana, great to see you again. I did want to just say thank you and appreciate your involvement. All your companies have been integral in the success of the summit in the past, and look forward to the discussion today. So, Marco, why don't you take a few seconds here and introduce yourself and your company, and then we'll go to Diana and Alicia as well.
Yeah, sure. My name is Marco Gardino. I'm the head of innovation and sustainability at Panellists, which is one of the business lines of Enel Group. Enel is an electricity producing company, multinational utility vertically integrated in the whole value chain of the utility business, and Panellists is the business line of Enel focusing on new products and services with a specific focus on energy services, but not only energy services, but also many other ones. And some examples are electric mobility, of course, demand response, public lighting, and many retail products for the consumer markets. And we are active as Panellists in almost 30 countries, including Latin America, Europe, and North America.
Great. We'll let you expound upon that here momentarily. Diana, please introduce yourself.
Good afternoon to you all. Buongiorno, Brian. Very happy to see you again, to see all the panelists attendees. Unfortunately, we cannot meet face to face, but thanks to the organization for setting up this solution. Very valuable. And I'm from RSC, Ricerca sul Sistema Energetico. We are a public funded company in the research sector, and we carry out research in all the value chain of energy, that is production, transmission, distribution, final uses, and interactions with the environment. And we give support to institutions, that is the Ministry for the Economic Development and the National Authority for Energy. In particular, I'm head of a research group. Our focus is the integration of renewable sources and distributed generation into the grid, and the impacts of electrification of final uses, electric vehicles, heat pumps, and so on. From a regulatory point of view, tariffs and algorithm for optimization of planning and operation, and down to engagement of small customers.
Great. Diana, always wonderful to hear you. Alicia Medina, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. Very happy to be here and join you all. Indeed, so my name is Alicia Medina, and I work at SmartN as Business Development and Communications Manager. SmartN is a European business association for demand-side flexibility, and so our aim is basically to ensure that every energy user, meaning every business, every home, and every car, can play a role in supporting a clean energy system. Our association represents different parties that have a role in this clean energy system of today and also tomorrow, of course. And we have in our portfolio of members service providers, different markets and platforms, companies manufacturing and engineering building systems, e-mobility companies, but also prosumers.
Great. So the panel is New Energy Communities, Opportunities and Challenges for Power System Utilities and Operators. And first question is creation of regional and cross-border markets. How do you see that playing out from your company's perspectives? Marco, why don't we start with you on that?
Yeah, sure, happy to. But essentially, first of all, it is important to say that an integrated European market has to deliver efficiency both at the supply and the demand side. That's very important. And to the extent, I would say that having common rules triggers always fair competition, and also usually delivers better services and lower system cost. In our opinion, the clean energy package has pushed for the opening of markets to new technologies, which is very, very good. And that's a very positive step, because it was not only focusing on renewable energies, but also on their integration, and mainly by means of technologies such as storage and demand response, which are very important resources. With reference to the implementation activities at European level, I think we are at a good point. There is much to be done, but for instance, with reference to the forward and intraday markets, joint actions, European actions are in place, and they are allowing market participants to hedge their positions on cross-border capacities, and this is a good step, I think. With reference to the intraday, the XBIT project is slowly progressing, but is moving forward, and the target of having a single ID market is one of the most important. Still, work has to be done on the balancing markets, and what I would say is the balancing network code has set the basis for the creation of a European platform, and that's very important. And but still missing a network code on demand side flexibility, which is foreseen in the next years, and is something which Europe is working on, and it is on track. But any action on that is very important, and we see its implementation in the next years. So I think the vision is clear. That's very important. Actions have been already taken, and some others are still to be done, and some others seem to be implemented at national level.
Okay, Diana.
As I said before, RC is a resource center, so we are already carrying out studies and simulations in order to support our energy authority and ministry to define the new ancillary service market for the national flexibility, and also for cross-border interaction. And in my opinion, the challenge is how to integrate new actors of the power system, that is energy communities, and generally speaking, aggregation of small customers into these new in these services. Traditional services, balancing, tertiary, and so on, and new services, for example, fast reserve. And this needs to define technical and functional requirements, but also to help people understand which new business models could arise from this. And also because, as other panelists told us before, engagement of small customer is rather difficult for several reasons. Digital divide, awareness of energy, tariffs, and so on. Several people are not able to read and to understand a simple bill of electricity. So how they can they understand how to participate to the ancillary service market through an aggregator, and which is the remuneration for that. So we need a cultural process, in my opinion, in order to really engage people in this transition. Not only from a theoretical point of view, is it better to have a self-dispatch instead of a central dispatch approach for the ancillary service market?
Okay, appreciate that. Alicia, your thoughts, please.
Yes, indeed. So thank you for that. So from our perspective, cross-border markets are more efficient, not at least to help the integration of variable renewables with different patterns of supply across Europe. But from our standpoint, it is really crucial to say that flexibility assets should also be able to take part of the cross-border markets, which means that not only markets should be integrated as it is already with the wholesale, but also balancing markets with different projects in place. But also the requirements should be aligned. For example, pre-qualifications requirements for demand and flexibility providers still differ a lot across Europe. And of course, this makes it quite prohibitive for small and new players in Europe to take part if these pre-qualification requirements are different in the different need to be completed differently in the distinct countries in which they operate.
Okay, thank you, Alicia. So next question, the electricity directive and the renewable electricity directive, have they been set down in clear signals and given you the proper guidance that you need as far as being able to implement programs and efforts to match up with those directive requirements? Diana, why don't we start with you this time? You're on mute.
Okay. If I understood correctly, the definitions of the new directives and the effects, because I cannot hear you.
It was the electricity directive and the renewable electricity directive.
Okay. So also in Italy, we are dealing with the transposition process of these two directives, giving definitions on rather the same actors of the power system. That is self-consumers, collective self-consumers, and energy communities. In Italy, for example, we are having a discussion about the possibility of transposing them into one single framework. But at my knowledge, this is not possible. So we will have two sets of definitions for one regarding renewable energy, so not only electricity, but also thermal energy. And from the electricity market directive, we will have definition on electricity, but not only renewables, also from fossil fuels. So, for example, cogeneration, it is not clear which role would play in both these systems, in both these definitions. So,
Okay.
we are publishing notes, papers on this.
Okay, great. Marco.
Yeah, I think with reference to the electricity directive and the renewable energy directive, I think the answer is mostly yes, because they have set down a clear set of rights, but at the same time they have given flexibility at national level to implement those guidelines and directives in a way which is sound and effective for the specific local context. And I think this is a good thing. We need always to think about that the way flexibility rules, such as demand response and energy storage, are regulated at European and national level is very important, because it has a clear impact on on the business cases which are then viable for all forms of self-consumptions, let's say, including energy communities. If everything is implemented in the right way, of course, they have the potential to broaden further market participants' choice. And this will ultimately facilitate engagement of consumers and will support also the emergence of new actors and business models, which is particularly good in the context of local flexibility markets. And that's something that when the directives are taken and implemented at national level has to be taken into account. So I think this is the key step. We are in that phase. We are exactly in that part of the process, and we consider it essential to have a variety of trading mechanisms implemented at national level to ensure what I have just said. That's, I think, the key point.
So a lot of what's going on today, are the systems there to allow for the efficient use of renewables, grid congestion, and recognizing the economic benefits of renewables? Are those systems in place out there for you, or are you putting them in place? How do you see that playing out for your organizations? Marco, why don't you go start us this time?
Happy to. Essentially, the answer is yes, because in the peer-to-peer scheme, which is described in the Electricity Directive, I'm referring in particular to Article 15. Actually, active consumers are responsible for their imbalances, and also they need to avoid the establishment of parallel private networks, and which is in general considered by all the stakeholders an unfavorable option, because a network out of the responsibility of a DSO may, of course, increase costs for the rest of the consumers, especially in markets like the European ones, in which grid networks are quite developed. And this is a very positive approach because it leverages on existing grid resources without creating new ones, and at the same time allow for efficient installation of new distributed resources. So I think that's really a good approach, which is leveraging on existing assets in a way to make it possible for the final consumers to have all the resources needed in order to install new renewables. So the mechanism is interesting. And also, I would mention that at a national level in Italy, the energy plan, the Italian National Energy Plan assesses that 55% of the new PV installations in the coming years in Italy will be implemented by means of energy communities. So also the assessment at the national level of these mechanisms is quite good in terms of the expected impact.
Diana.
Okay. In my opinion, we will have to face the composition of different signals coming from outside the home. That is a price signal for tariff, a signal for the within the energy community to increase the shared energy, and then another signal for the flexibility towards the local distribution networks, and also for the ancillary service market. And probably all these signals will be out of phase, especially in some hours of the day. So first of all, we will need adequate support, software, application, and so on, in order to simplify this optimization at the final customer, at the consumer level. Secondly, the second challenge is the fair allocation of grid and also system cost among all the users of the power system. That is, we are moving very fast from a passive system to a decentralized and so on system. So the actual use of the grid is different and depends on the geographical position, if I'm a consumer or not, if I'm belonging to an energy community or not. And in my opinion, we have to take into account that some people, some customers, are not able to participate to these new schemes. And we will have to avoid that these customers will support the main part of system cost, for example.
So at this point, we still have a few minutes left before the end of our session. Marco, do you have any thoughts on on your operations and your setup that we haven't hit on today that you would like to share with us?
Yeah, that's. I think it could be interesting to mention that we are launching an energy community in the northern part of Italy, in the town of Reggio Emilia, and that is going to be the first adoption case for ENEDIS, and then we have, of course, many more in the pipeline. I think this first project is going to be interesting because the target is to maximize self-consumption. We are going to implement this in the frame of a super condominium. So it's a group of buildings with more than 50 apartments divided into different places close to the town of Reggio Emilia. And we're going to install a PV plant, a shared one, and dedicated energy storages for each building. So I think it's going to be interesting the way this is going to, the distributed storage is going to interact with the centralized PV, and the way also the benefits of this system is going to be shared in the frame of the community. This is going to be done in the framework of Decreto Mille Proroghe, which is the first Italian law on energy communities, and we expect more regulatory advancements and news, let's say, next year. But it is already possible to do that in Italy before the full implementation of RED II directive. And actually, we are carrying out this project in partnership with Area C. So Diana maybe may comment further on that.
Diana.
Okay. You can find information on this Mille Proroghe law and all the details regarding the partial transposition of RED II directive into Italian framework in my presentation. And I confirm that we are collaborating with the ENEDIS for trying to understand which is the best way for defining collective self-consumption and energy communities into the final transposition of this directive. Also supporting our ministry to understand which is the best scheme, for example, for sharing information between the actors. And in my presentation, you can find at the end a slide with a recap of this pilot project on energy communities and self-consumption.
Yes. So the question that I had asked you before was about the electricity directive and the renewable electricity directive. and whether or not that has set down a clear set of rights and requirements for national level support. And we were interested in your take on that.
Mm-hmm. So indeed, something I think for us is important to highlight is that, especially in the electricity directive, that consumer is truly put at the center of the clean energy transition. And of course, the new rules enable the active participation of consumers, which, of course, from our perspective as Martin, is definitely key. In terms of, if we go specifically to the energy communities and with, for instance, the citizen energy communities, which are defined in the electricity directive with a very strong people-centric focus. However, from our perspective, there is still no clear business implications from these provisions in this regard. But if we look at the Renewables Energy Directive, we see that indeed that they are defined as well as other provisions to foster renewable self-consumption.
Well, we have reached the end of our time. Hopefully we will be able to continue on the discussion here in the future. I know that Costa has some great plans for how we're going to be able to continue on with these virtual efforts over the course of the coming year, and hopefully we can get you some more floor time to talk about the work that you are doing. So Alicia, Diana, Marco, thank you very, very much for your time today. We appreciate it, and we look forward to seeing you again. Enjoy.
Thank you. Goodbye, everybody.
And with that, can we have Luis, Gad, and Adam? Can you please join us on the stage?
Hello, Brian. It's great to see you again.
Luis, wonderful. Adam, pleasure to meet you.
Pleasure to be here. Thanks for the invitation.
So this next panel is you talking about making electric vehicles the champions of flexibility in the power sector. We've got three great speakers here, as you've seen by the earlier presentations. But first, why don't we go through and give opportunity for everybody to introduce themselves briefly. And Luis, why don't you give us a start and introduce yourself, and then we'll go to Gad and Adam afterwards.
So I am Luis Ferreira. I work for EDP Distribution, which is the main distribution system operator in Portugal. And I lead an innovation team that dwells on one of our innovation areas, focusing on electric mobility, among other issues.
Great. Gad?
Yeah, I'm
scared.
It's nice, huh? Santa Claus is coming soon.
There you go.
Yeah, I'm Gerd Schauer from Verbund. I work in the Department of Corporate Innovation and New Business, and I'm there the Senior Technology Manager. So I'm more the technician than the economist. We make interesting programs within our company. On the one side, we have the focus to the core business for green generation, efficient and safe generation, digitalization. And on the other side, we have some core directions where we are going now. The new storage topic, the green hydrogen, the digital energy, and the e-mobility. So on the other side, we make cooperation with university. We have a startup program, accelerator program, and we will make lighthouse projects. So that's our work.
Great, great. Adam.
Hi, I am Adam Hartz. I am the Senior Director for Strategic Partnerships for ChargePoint in Europe. So by accent, I am American, but I assure you, I am dialing in from the same time zone. I live in Germany. I cover our European markets, and I work on our relationships to utilities and energy retailers. And ChargePoint, for those that don't know, is currently a privately held, but in the process of going public, technology provider that's focused specifically on electric vehicle infrastructure and the solutions from hardware, software, and services that are needed to make that a scalable proposition. We create premium experiences for drivers through mobile applications, vehicle integrations, and services, and we sell turnkey solutions to businesses, be it a fleet depot operator, a workplace, or even consumers for their homes. So we're thrilled to be included in this conversation, as I think we've, as a technology company, cracked the nut of how to make this viable for workplaces and drivers, but we have to make sure that we're very well integrated and part of the conversation with the utilities and the distribution network operators to make sure that we can all scale this market together.
Okay, Luis, over to you.
We were here to discuss a bit the theme of electric vehicles as eventually champions of flexibility. And I think it's a great issue. And it seems like all of these issues from the conference are starting to be woven together, which is very interesting. It means that we are all focusing on the same subjects, and apparently flexibility is maybe one of the key issues that we will be continuing to discuss in the following years. It brings I have a great desire to call some of the former speakers from the other panels and to maybe provoke them because of some of the things that were said, and they really interact with what we are going to speak here. One of the issues that I think we've been watching is that clearly DSOs and TSOs will need to work together more in the upcoming years, because more and more what we are seeing as an overall tendency is that the classical sources of flexibility that were available mostly for TSOs, because for DSOs this was not such an issue. It used to be more of an issue of a fit and forget approach, and this is for DSOs. This will not be the future, certainly, and for TSOs it seems like the classical sources of flexibility that they had at hand are starting to disappear, and so they are trying to grapple to the new sources that will allow them to manage their grids. But I wouldn't say unfortunately, but structurally what we see is that most of these sources will be connected to distribution grids. And so distribution system operators will have to play a more active role here, and TSOs will have to get more used to have someone in the middle between their sources of flexibility and them. And this is of course an issue that will have to be discussed, and maybe create some strong discussions between TSOs and DSOs. But eventually reality will step in, and all of this will have to work together. Another issue that I thought was very interesting, and I think that is a provocation, is that as we go deeper and deeper into DSO networks, we are dealing with smaller and smaller customers. And some of the principles that are the basis for, a sort of a holy grail that we have today, that is the market approach, where you have a load of offer and a load of demand, and rational actors very interested in participating in that market, they are simply not true as you go down and down the distribution grids. And so I think that is another issue that we will have to deal with. Hi, Brian, welcome back. And that will probably, and the provocation is this one. I don't think the issue here is with technology. Technology is already being dealt with and solved with many of the solutions and projects and platforms available, that some of them we have been seeing them present today. I think it's more, as Alicia, I think it was Alicia that mentioned before, the business case is just not there. When you go to customers that own a Tesla, of course you can pay them more and more and they will eventually participate, or they will participate, at least some of them, out of concern for the electricity system or for the climate or renewables. But I think we'll have to see if this is scalable for users.
Great. Good.
You are muted.
You're muted, Gerd. There we go.
Now it must work. Fine. No, it's to prevent the echo in the background. Yeah, in my presentation, I made the focus more to the, let's say, upcoming topic. The electrical vehicle, as I showed, are already going into the market. They come with production in the range of millions. And so that business is going on. Also, the infrastructure is already there. And from the technology and from the technology manager aspect, so I am looking more to the future. And already 20 years ago, we made a study to the electrification of the system, but I think now it's time to think about this. And Siemens made their overhead line. You have solutions with batteries for the trucks, the light vehicle duty on the market for distribution of goods. And then there are questions upcoming. The one is, if you have trucks, you have to consider 1.4 up to 2 kilowatt hours energy demand per kilometer. So when a car is going to 300 kilometers, you have a quantity of energy and also power which you have to deliver. And you have to think about this. Do we have it more on battery side with high power charging stations? Is it a solution what Siemens presented with the overhead line? Or maybe do we have in future also other technologies available, especially for this sector? And I think we have also to make differentiation between passenger cars and the larger trucks. So in my opinion, a passenger vehicle is not a driving vehicle, it's a standing vehicle, because when you look to the statistics, it's standing 97% of the time. If you're looking to a truck, it's rolling, it's transporting, and this over maybe 800,000 kilometers distance when you go from Vienna to Amsterdam or Hamburg or anywhere to transport goods. Yeah, and so I wanted also make outlook to this field. I think hydrogen is coming more and more. It has some advantages with different technologies. So was it enough for the introduction? Because we have then the questions and I would go deeper then. Okay?
Great. Adam, you're on mute.
Sure, thank you. Yeah. Yeah, I appreciated both of those comments from Luis and Gerd. I think we see all of the same issues. ChargePoint as a technology provider thinks that our role is to develop enterprise scale systems that can integrate to both a site and a larger market. And I think there's an important distinction because some of the issues might be solved by that. So Louise, I think you're right. The further down you go at the customer level, the smaller they get, the less they care. The less responsive they'll be to potentially some economic incentive to change their behavior. But we see a lot of the development in the next few years taking place in the context of the existing building architecture and energy ecosystem that we have. So we have a heavy focus on ensuring that we can integrate the charging infrastructure in our software to things like building management systems. So we can basically scale up, and what you're controlling from a load perspective is more material, and people will respond more to that, and you have more flexibility in how you are guiding charging, let's say. The other thing is, in the context of the electrification of mobility, we're connecting two systems. So the energy system to transportation, and now we have new inputs. And that's the other area of integration that we're focused on, which is to say, when you think about transportation companies and their vehicles, or you think about buses in a depot, they not only need to fuel or fill up their battery, but they need to do so to complete a specific job. If they're going to drive 200 kilometers, if they're going to drive 4 hours around on a route for busing people around Vienna, we can integrate the need of that vehicle by looking at something like their telematics systems or understanding their route planning systems into the charging, so that we can optimize when that charging is done and therefore minimize the impact on the grid. That's a pretty good deal for customers, because the more we can integrate into the systems that exist today, that they have today, and the systems that they need to run their businesses, the easier we can make it for them to electrify. So I'll also pause there, and we can go into more detail on the questions.
All right. So taking a look at this, I mean, Adam, that was some very interesting dynamics about kind of integrating real-time operations into, certainly what is going to be impacting the DSO environments. Have you found a willingness on the part of the DSOs to work with you in that regard, or are you running into any sort of obstacles?
No, I think that there are lots of DSOs that are out there that are thinking about how to get engaged in this. And there are lots of pilots for technology companies like mine to participate in. We are working, for example, on the ELBI project. So that's with the city of Hamburg and Stromnetz Hamburg. And we are participating with 5 or 6 other technology providers. Stromnetz Hamburg, based on the demand on their distribution grid, sends signals to our cloud via a communications protocol called OpenADR that allows us to respond and send signals to our customers who have opted into controlled charging. So we can shed load when a particular grid connection point has an issue that's identified by the DSO, for example. So yeah, I mean, you can take your pick depending on the country or the market you're in. Lots of exciting places to participate. I think what's interesting is how we take this from the pilot phase to something that's more standardized, more broadly accepted, therefore easier for DSOs and DNOs to participate in, and companies such as mine to participate in scale.
Okay. So Luis and Gad, and we'll start with Luis first. From the perspective of all of these resources, How are you seeing the integration of these resources from a supply perspective, into your operations? Are you looking at it from an ancillary perspective, as ancillary services? You taking a look at it from an energy supply perspective? Given the magnitude or the lack of magnitude, is there any sort of treatment that you are, say, organizing EVs to only being a partial resource, or how are you looking at this commodity as it plays into your operations?
Well, thank you, Brian. I think in the end you will have to look at them through all of those lenses or different perspectives, right? And I would highlight that we hear time and time again that this is an issue for delaying grid investments, and we don't see it. It's not only that. It's maybe that's maybe a more obvious outcome that people that is easy to pick up, but I think it's more on the security of supply, voltage management, and also balancing of loads in our grids. And so more and more, I believe we are acting as a system operator for our own grids, as a true system operator that needs to balance lots of distributed energy resources, such as distributed solar, electric vehicles, heat pumps, that more and more will drive our traditional stable load patterns and make them more difficult to predict and to plan. Of course, we can try to forecast for a region in 5 years advance what will be our needs for investment and maybe flexibility requirements. But I think we will have to understand that we really don't know, because most of these patterns are more and more difficult to predict.
Gad?
Yeah, Jai, I just unmuted my microphone. I will continue to Louis' speech. Also in Austria, we have the targets to come to 100% electricity production by renewables. So that's the one fact. We have to upgrade PV and wind power to reach this target. When we look now to the mobility, I see there are two different levels. On the one side, we founded years ago the company Smartrix, a mobility provider, where we are now one of the partners of this company, to provide solutions to operate the charging ports. This is on low level. On the other side, we made interesting programs, the Ultra E project with higher charging powers, and with high charging powers from 150 to 350 kilowatts. So it's in my presentation. And when you have now charging station with some of that, you come up in the megawatt range. And we had an interesting combination that we put lithium-ion storage to this charging station. And this gives us a direct connection to the DSO grid, to the middle voltage grid, and on a higher power level. So on the one side, we can provide ancillary service to the grid. On the other side, it's very expensive to have the connection costs to the grid on that level. And you can reduce this dramatically. So we take the peak power out of the battery, and we can recharge the battery when there is enough time. When we look now to the low-level charging, I made investigations already years ago. If you have 1 million electrical vehicles and they are driving, let's say, 25 kilometers, so they need daily maybe around 4 kilowatt hours. If you have 1 million of cars, it's an energy of 4 gigawatt hours, which you have to deliver every day. And so I come back to this topic with smart charging, so that the medium power to bring this energy to the electrical vehicles is about 170 megawatt. So when you have the standing cars plugged in while parking, then you have a big storage where you can make balancing in a very good way. And it's not necessary, maybe sometimes, to feed from the car back to the grid. So you can manage, if you increase the power from the medium average of 170 megawatts up, or maybe reduce it. In Austria, the balancing power is, I think, 60 megawatts. So you see the big potential for this services if you have smart charging, but we will have to do something to come there. It will take time.
In the closing minutes, let me just ask the three of you this encompassing question. Do you feel, and we'll start with Adam and go to Luis and end with Gad, do you feel that EVs are the champions of flexibility, reliability, and resilience? Adam.
I think they're a big piece of it. I think my answer is it depends on whether or not we have the right IT systems. So do we have the right platforms to integrate not just EVs, but all of the renewables and other distributed energy assets that are out there? I think we'll get there. I think they're going to be a big piece of balancing, and I think there's a smart way to integrate them into the grid. So I would say yes.
Wonderful. Luis, your view.
Yeah, well, I would add to what Adam said, which for which I agree completely. I think they have all the characteristics to be the champions of flexibility, at least in DSO grids, but also for the balancing. Although I think for TSO balancing there are other sources, so it's a piece of the puzzle, as Adam said. I also need that besides the IT, we will need to have some shifts in the frameworks, legal, regulatory, to allow some of this stuff to happen, maybe, and probably on an automatic way.
Okay. Gad, you get the final word.
Yeah, I think it's already all said. Maybe a critical point. We will get more and more storage and maybe flexible storage to the grid with the electrical vehicles. I hope that the renewables are also coming in the same way, that we do not have too much flexibility on the market, because then the prices will go down.
Great.
Thank you.
Gad, Adam, Luis, thank you very, very much for your time today. We appreciate the hearing from you. We look forward to future discussions, and hopefully we'll be able to get together face to face one of these days real soon. Thank you for your time today, and appreciate it very much.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Brad. Take care.
So with that, our next panel is dealing with the Green Deal Directive and leveraging power. We've got Katharina Wittenbach, and then Ivan Andrzejczyk and Giuseppe Montesano. If you could join me on the stage, please, that would be great. So why don't we start with Giuseppe? If you can do a brief introduction on your activities, that would be great. And then we'll go to Ivan.
Sure. I'm Giuseppe Montesano. I'm the Deputy Director of the Enel Foundation. The Enel Foundation is a think tank-like center for strategic studies, and we aim at understanding the major global trends in the energy domain and provide scientific stimulus to international and local debates. So let me also take this opportunity of an introduction to say that representing the Enel Foundation in this debate today, I will try to bring the perspective on how power can contribute to energy efficiency from the point of view of the results of some of the studies we have done in order to investigate this very important issue.
Okay, I'm Ivan Androcec. I'm working in Croatian electricity utility. So in Croatian electricity utility, we are dealing with all aspects of electricity sector for generation, transmission, distribution, supply. We have energy service company, CEPRA. So with this topic, energy efficiency, we are dealing in all segments. So I hope to say something on it, but I'm working in a strategy and development department, so we are dealing with other topics also, especially with renewables and how to deal to achieve the targets with renewables and all the things around energy transition. So hope to discuss on this panel.
But Katarina, welcome, welcome. Great to see you again.
Yes, thanks a lot for inviting DG Energy and especially me for being actively part in this discussion. Happy to talk to you.
Well, first thing we want to do is allow you to introduce yourself, and then as part of this panel, we're going to let you go first with the discussion that you annually provide us from the EU Commission perspective. I know, but you don't speak for the Commission, but we give the opportunity to to hear what's going on. So we'll open up right after you do your introduction.
Yes, thanks a lot. So yes, I think it's the third time I attend this format or this conference, and I'm really happy that you could make it happen also this year with all the circumstances. I hope all your colleagues and family friends are doing fine. So for us, I'm working in DG ENER. We are still well connected to each other. It took a while, but it's really working well, I must say. I'm working in the energy efficiency unit. We focus on the general policy and on financing. We have a sister unit. A year before it was still in our competences, but now it moved to the sister unit. We are not focusing anymore specifically on buildings and the energy efficiency of products, but nevertheless we work close together with this unit. And yeah, if you would allow me, I would present later on a bit about what especially my work in the recent weeks was. So I'm the main contact point for member states and also for stakeholders and associations for the energy savings obligation under the Energy Efficiency Directive. So it's focusing on the period 2014 to 2020, but also with the climate plans now on the period 2021 to 2030. And then I have also, let's say, a strong focus of my work is dedicated to the alleviation of energy poverty and all water-related issues, so water energy nexus. And thanks a lot for inviting me.
Always our pleasure to have you here. So let's begin the questions. So how can utilities meet their obligations to reduce the amount of energy delivered to customers by 1.5% each year, which I understand to be the Article 7 directive. So with that in mind, Anne Katarina, why don't we start with you and then we'll go to the others.
I mean, the 1.5% for the period 2014 to 2020 is first an obligation member states have, but of course they are free to choose energy efficiency obligation schemes, and so to invite, or it's a nice word for obligate, but to invite utilities who are close to the customers, close to the households, and close to industry to help them to fulfill their energy savings obligation. And I would say, how is it possible? Maybe from another perspective, we can say that the energy savings obligation from on EU level is working well. So we just published recently the Energy Efficiency Progress Report. This was based on the assessment of the annual reports member states submitted in 2020, but it's about savings that occurred from 2014 to 2018. And we can see on EU level, aggregated, we already achieved 55% of what is needed, so 126 MTUE out of 230 MTUEs. And we can also see that there are 6 member states who are very likely to meet this energy savings target, and 8 member states very unlikely. And for 13 plus the UK, it's likely to meet the target. And what role utilities have? So we can see from our assessment so far for 2014 to 2018, the major part of energy savings achieved come from energy efficiency obligation schemes. It's the most important policy measure by now. We can see it's strong. At the beginning, there were some, let's say, gaps or delays in regarding the success of policy measures, but we can see it works well. And compared to this, only 16% come from energy and CO2 taxes and from financial instruments, and only 6%, for example, from voluntary agreements. So I would say, I mean, how it's really, and that's where we try to support member states. How is it working? It requires a really clear scheme on national level, and it also requires the right choice of obligated parties. So it's not, you cannot say a one-fits-all approach. Member states have flexibility whom to oblige, and as long as it is on a non-discriminatory basis, the ones should be obliged that are close to the customers and who have the possibility to achieve energy savings.
Thank you. Ivan.
Well, we have a very challenging issue with energy efficiency, of course, in Croatia in general, and of course in my company also, because I think this is the most challenging part of energy transition, especially for Croatia, who is in 60% of European GDP. And our population is decreasing, so it's very challenging to achieve all of it. So we have a lot of old buildings also, and a very big target for energy refurbishment, which is the most costly. It was set up to 3% per year. But currently is around 0.5%. So it's very challenging to achieve this 3%. It needs a lot of money, a lot of resources, a lot of people, a lot of constructional activities, etc. Especially with introduction of near zero energy a building standard, so that's in general for the Croatia. And the second sector in Croatia, which is very challenging, is, of course, it was mentioned in the previous panel, transport. Transport is also the big issue, especially with this introduction of new infrastructure for alternative fuels, for LNG, electricity, hydrogen, biofuels, etc. So if I come back to my company, in every segment, as I said, we have measures to meet the goals for the company, not to have penalties on the end of the year. So the ministry is every year giving to our company the plan which we need to achieve. And if we do not achieve, we are paying penalties. And in generation part, we are having a lot of projects, and when we are having operation and maintenance, we are introducing a lot of energy efficiency measures like turbine efficiency or LED for the lightning and etc. In transmission and distribution, especially in distribution, we are focusing on the losses, and this is the main issue. And for the customers, we are having energy service company who is offering to our customers measures how to achieve and decrease the consumption.
Giuseppe, would you please share with us your thoughts?
Sure. Well, let me start from a few consideration on how this obligation deriving from Article 7 of the directive was mainly implemented in Italy. This was mainly implemented by placing obligations on distribution companies and introducing a white certificate schemes with tradable certificates. And what I would like to say is that there are a lot of lessons that have been learned from this. But I think that one of the main takeaways is that this has been very, very effective, especially in activating the low-hanging fruits. Once you have to start and activate more sophisticated ways of getting energy efficiency, then you also have to start thinking in a slightly different way. And the main concept that I would like to offer is that, in fact, the key word here should be energy efficiency. And that any policies that are put in place should bear this objective of reducing energy consumption as a target, not focusing specifically, as it has happened and as it happens in some cases, on reducing electricity consumption. Because sometimes, for example, if you are able to change the vector that is used for your energy consumption, you can activate an enormous efficiency potential. So what I think is very important is to create the conditions that enable not only utilities but also what are usually referred to as energy service companies to make offers, integrated offers with integrated approaches that can also enable activating the benefits that can come from, in many cases, the superior performances of electric technologies in terms of energy efficiency.
Ivan, I'll give you the opportunity to finish up your statement.
But also I can mention we are also dealing with heating. So we are also having EU funds now. We have big contract for refurbishment of our pipes, heating pipes in center of Zagreb. Just to decrease the losses in the heating system. And so we have a lot of projects which are dealing with, and for this period up to this year, I think there is no so big problems. But of course, with every year, it will be harder to achieve the targets because when you go up, then having a little bit more percentage is harder to achieve.
So with that, I mean, Ivan, you were just talking about some of the activities that your company and organization is promoting, to allow for focusing on less prescriptive and more market-oriented approaches. I'm just wondering, does your company have any visions on ways of doing that in the future? You mentioned about the fact that it's going to get harder and harder, but obviously the directive is still making sure that you're moving in the right direction. How do you see your organization adjusting to that and moving in that direction?
Well, at the moment, we are just, the ministry is changing the law on the energy efficiency, so it's just the changing up to directive from 2018. And of course, we are watching what is going with the changing of new directive, which will come very soon. So we are watching in more details how these measures can be much broader and how to achieve through these projects, a lot of projects to count on it and to have it in for our company. And for now it is okay, but we are seeing that in every year it will be much harder, as I said.
Giuseppe, how about for your organization?
Well, from, as I said, our perspective of think tank that carries out strategic studies, what you said about the need to introduce more market-oriented approach, this is certainly something that has great potential to introduce more efficiency in the energy system. But referring this, well, what I would like to make is a couple of points. The first one is that if we refer again to the possibility of using and taking advantage of the opportunities that are offered by efficient electric technologies, there is a need in order to have more market-oriented approaches or choices that are made by customers in a way that these are more referred to the actual costs of the service. What is needed is to try to create a framework in which the prices of the alternative energy vectors for the final customers are can be offered on a level playing field. And instead, what we are witnessing in many cases is that at least in Europe, the electricity bills are sometimes burdened by a number or a significant quantity of policy costs that have nothing to do or little to do with the actual costs of delivering the service. So one thing that should be done is to, first of all, to free the electricity bill from these burdens. Second point that I would like to make is also about the fact that if you want to introduce more efficiency in the system, there is certainly a need to activate significant investments on the consumer side. And sometimes the consumer is refrained from investing because he or she has to bear the upfront capital costs of these investments. Therefore, mechanisms that allow the final consumer to be relieved from this upfront capital cost would be extremely useful to activate these investments. And for example, tax credits are very useful instrument for that. But not only the credits, but also the possibility for the final consumer to give the credits that it can get to a bank or again to an energy service company, so that in fact he or she is almost completely relieved from bearing the upfront capital cost. And this would help a lot develop a market for energy efficiency.
Okay. And Katerina, let me ask you this question. Do you think that there's any interest or willingness in the regulatory environment to maybe recognizing the term efficiency could be utilized in a manner of taking a look at, you know, instead of the typical recognition that it just means, you know, less kilowatt hours, but utilizing activities that are more associated with the types of commodities in electricity. You know, for some people, you know, heating may be more efficient, electric vehicles may be more efficient. So recognizing that the word efficiency doesn't necessarily just mean reduction, but could it also be interpreted in such a manner that it would be for the appropriate uses and creating efficiencies of electricity through, you know, through the various needs and desires of the consumers.
Yeah, thanks a lot. May I just reply to Giuseppe and Ivan? I think the thoughts you brought forward would be also very interesting for us to receive. You might know a week ago we opened a public consultation on the revision process of the EED. It's still open until the 9th of February. And we are really looking for good input. It's not only about the target, like the Article 3 target, how this should, or energy efficiency could contribute to the decarbonization target of 55%. We already assess that at least the primary energy consumption, final energy consumption should be increased. Or the cap should be increased, so by 37%. But this is not the only purpose of the open public consultation. We're also looking for good new approaches, how to make energy efficiency more attractive also to private investors, but also to member states, how, as you said, the upfront costs could be, let's say, distributed in a better way, for example. So we would really welcome if you could also actively participate in this open public consultation. And I found it interesting what you said also about the white certificate scheme. That's what I'm also looking at the moment, because we identified also that the white certificates have an important role in cost optimization, and it allows also third parties to enter the savings market or energy savings market. And what you said about the price signals, so I guess it's also good tool to provide price signals to market actors and to let's say give a formal value to energy savings. Of course, well, we know also the challenges and the disadvantages, be it the risk of frauds and so on. I mean, for energy efficiency, we still think we need energy efficiency as defined or related to energy consumption, that's for sure. But from a regulatory perspective, I mean, it depends a little bit on the member state, but I know, for example, for Germany, they have factors for the efficiency, I mean, overall efficiency of DSOs and TSOs. And if for example, TSO or DSO is working well in a specific perspective, they have a better factor which allows them to get better tariffs or a better decision regarding tariffs. So I would say to talk to the national regulators and find a way how, let's say, energy efficiency efforts of TSOs and DSOs could be considered in the tariffication, be it in electricity or gas. You could also think about it's an advantage to ensure that there is no or almost non-leakage, or maybe a TSO is doing well in a DSO is doing well in supporting final customers or households in changing lighting. So I think this is something which should be recognized as a service to the overall energy system.
Sorry about that. First, my mute button seems to go on by itself. Unfortunately, we are at the end of our time for this particular panel. And Katharina, Ivan, Giuseppe, thank you very, very much for your participation today. We look forward to future discussions and gatherings where we can, maybe have a little more time to elaborate and discuss these questions. And thank you again for your time. With that, Ivan, you can stay on because you're on the next panel as well. But Mona, Andrew, and Lotta, if you are out there, could you please join the stage? Since this is a different panel topic and we're talking about energy project financing, why don't you take a couple of moments and talk about what the work is that HEP is doing with regard to project financing?
Well, we are focusing, as I said in the previous panel, we are focusing on achieving renewable scenario. So we are focusing on a lot of renewable projects. For example, for revitalization of existing hydropower plants, for rebuilding new hydropower plants, for building new wind power plants, building new solar power plants, acquisition of the projects of the wind and solar power plant. And we are building also high efficient cogeneration units. So these four pillars are our main direction for renewable development from our company, and it is in line with the new energy strategy in Croatia, which is focusing for ambitious goals of renewables. And for now, regarding financing, we are let's say quite good on the financing issue at the moment with the company, because we are financing it with the own resources, but we are also looking for other financing possibilities. For example, this high efficient cogeneration in Zagreb, it is financed by EBRD and EIB. So it is also the credit line from that source. And we are looking, because these credit lines now are quite good and let's say cheaper than in the previous years. We are also looking to having finance maybe other projects with different kinds of the credit lines, and we are also having one bond issue, so we will also see in 2022 when it expires, we will probably go up with another bond or whatever the company will choose for it.
Lada, why don't you take a few minutes, or and introduce yourself and provide us a little background on yourself and your organization.
Good. I mean, I have been participating, I think, now for the third time in this conferences. I'm running the European Energy Efficiency Fund, which is investing in energy efficiency, not in the energy. And as a part of DWS, which is an asset manager of the Deutsche Bank. And we're investing in all type of different projects from in the European Union, mainly connected, as I said. I mean, some of them are renewable energy, but mainly it's energy efficiency.
Okay. So from a project financing perspective, how is your organization benefiting or seeing challenges, or how are you able to enable project financing projects moving forward?
Look, I mean, we're the small player. We're not the bank, so we're the fund. If you say, when Andrew is connected, and you'll see that the project that Mufag Bank is doing a different one in comparison to what we do. We do really small tickets. So this is project financing on a very small scale, where you have where you're financing the projects of 5 to 25 million, and surely as a fund we have different challenges, and especially in now where we have now that's Andrew. Andrew will be telling us more about their large project financing schemes than our subsidies. And for the fund, it's important since we have the public entities. So we work with the public entities, and it means we try to facilitate the access to project finance structures to the small municipalities, to the small, to the regions, and to the small. I mean, small projects, everything is small. Municipalities are small, projects are small. Okay, the companies are not small, so there are some of them also large companies that are participating in that kind of developments in the project finance, yeah.
Hi.
Hi, Andrew.
Andrew.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you. So why don't you take a couple of minutes and introduce yourself and your organization, and how you see the project financing world.
Sure, thank you, and apologies for the delay on my side and my technical issues. My name is Andrew Doyle. I'm a director in the Power and Renewables team at MUFG. We're one of the largest project finance lenders globally, with offices in the US, London, Tokyo, Australia, and Singapore. We've been covering this project finance for many, many years, and the area that I've been involved in for the last coming on 20 years has always been a very kind of significant part of our overall business. We've been covering the full stream of power and renewables projects, generation, as well as transmission, offshore transmission, and regulated assets as well. And we do a lot in Western Europe recently, and that's been really limited to renewables, given the kind of the lack of any kind of real support for thermal assets, and then in the Middle East as well, that tends to be quite a strong area for us as well, both on thermal side, but increasingly on the renewables market as well.
So let me ask this question of the three of you. Taking a look at 2020, the conditions of the pandemic and everything that's going on, how has maybe the pandemic influenced the activities that your organizations have been doing for this year? And do you kind of see the pandemic influencing your activities over the next few to several years? And Andrew, we'll start with you, and then we'll go to Lada and Ivan.
Well, I have to say, haven't seen a significant impact on the market for due to COVID-19 specifically. I think in the very first lockdown, there was some concerns around supply chain issues and getting key equipment, components, etc. Primarily maybe from Chinese factories, as well as the movement of construction personnel to and from site, or if they're coming in from a different country, for example. But in reality, we've not really seen a significant amount of direct impact on projects. And the finance market itself has been very, very active. So we've closed Sea Green, which was a large offshore wind project in the UK. And we've just this week signed and closed Dogger Bank, which is, again, probably now the largest financing of an offshore wind project globally. So from that respect, there doesn't seem to be a significant downturn in activity. And certainly from a personal perspective, I do feel very, very busy, even despite COVID.
Lada, your perspective, please.
I mean, we have been involved in a quite interesting project, actually, in street lighting upgrades in Portugal. And we have signed the project. The finance, it's a forfeiting scheme. It's not really a real project finance, a facility in the large scale. But we were surprised how good it actually operated. The installations works have been going on under the COVID situation, because for us it was also important that we have certain timelines and plans that we're dispersing the assets, and the projects could be then implemented within the timelines that we have considered. I mean, since all the equipment was coming from Europe, we didn't have any issues depending on the Chinese products or whatever, so it was relatively easy for us. Also in having done what I feel will be probably an issue, since we're an impact management fund, we're not doing only like from the financial, we are also managing it from the impact. It's for all of our projects to differentiate next year where the energy savings are really coming from, whether they come from the installations that we have done, or from that the university was shut down and there was no energy use in the 3 months or 6 months in the year. So this will be like a challenge for us for the next year to say, okay, how do we differentiate what is related to the work that we have done and what has to do with the COVID itself, the situation of the close down. I mean, we do expect a lot of projects to come up, but as you know, and as Brent has mentioned at the beginning, I mean, Green Deal is a huge investment, and that we were expecting a lot of investments to come from there, especially in the Green Deal area, whether it will be renewable and installations or whatever. I think that the large financiers, the large project financiers, should profit from the Green Deal. We look at this as a possibility to receive some subsidies for some of the projects that we're looking at, which are probably not could be fully financed on the commercial basis, like some district heating installations, which require district heating networks construction on the local regional basis. But let's see. I mean, we should try to remain positive.
Great, thank you. Ivan.
And for my company, this year was a very good investment year. It was, I think, the biggest in the last couple of years. Although we experienced some issues with the COVID, some delays in especially March, April. due to equipment, like Andrew said, also the similar things. But we have managed to go through all the projects with these little delays and for example, with wind power plant, solar power plants, and we are also now finishing the first LNG terminal in Croatia, which is financed by EU funds and also by local funds, state funds, and it will go in operation in 1 month period. So big investments are going on in Croatian under Croatian electricity company, and hopefully that we also have a big plans for the next year and also the next several years.
Okay, wonderful.
Could I maybe add one more point to that?
Oh,
Brian?
sure, Andrew. Go right ahead.
One area that I was kind of interested in around COVID is, if there is a kind of a longer-term economic shock, which leads to lower demand, lower consumption, how that impacts in power prices, and in particular as we try to move away from subsidised renewables. That means that there's a greater kind of reliance from sponsors when they're bidding for these projects on the power price. So one thing I would be interested to see in the next kind of few kind of auction rounds, transactions or projects that were going part merchant or even zero subsidy, will they still continue to come forward if the projections for power demand and electricity prices are still depressed over the next 3 to 5 years? Do people build that in? Are they concerned? Does it impact their investment decisions?
I think a great question, and the dynamics of what we were talking about earlier on planning and modeling are gonna help figure out that question. But with that in mind, let me ask the three of you this question: What opportunities are there right now to try to encourage, better tools, better resources, opportunities for maybe, improvements to project financing? What are things that could be done in your view that would further enable, moving forward, taking a look? Is it market pricing? Is it feed-in tariffs? Is it, what mechanisms do you see as really being advantageous for, the prosperity of future financing opportunities? And why don't we start with Ivan this time, and then we'll go around the circle from there.
Of course, the market prices will be the best way, and it depends of in which country in Europe you are, that the prices are different. For Croatia, these market prices now are quite okay, and the predictions for the prices, of course, if we are looking on the long term, is that the prices will go up, which is for projects okay, but of course then the end users will have a little bit higher electricity prices. Now the drop in market prices in this year was of course experienced, as Andrew said also. But we expect that in next couple of years it will go back on the previous points. And the second point I wanted to say that we are also expecting a new premium system in Croatia, especially for the bigger projects. Now the auction is for smaller installations, and for bigger installations will go next year. And our company will want to participate in these auctions. Of course, this is mostly for renewables, and previously it was the tariff system. Now is the premium system, and after this premium, in a couple of years, all will be on the market prices.
Okay. Andrew, why don't we give you the floor next?
Well, I think as a banker, I'll always take anything that gives me revenue certainty. So feed-in tariffs or other kind of subsidies have really been the driver for investment in renewable projects over the last few years. As I was saying before, though, that we are starting to see the competitiveness of the technology coming in and the reliance on large subsidies falling away. But that then creates a new challenge for banks, and I probably have been in the game long enough to remember merchant CCGT financings, merchant coal financings, and the challenges and the difficulties that they had. Now, without an input cost, then renewables may be slightly more insulated from all of the price dynamics that come into play. But I still think it's a challenge that the banks are going to have to get their head around. Okay. What we might start seeing is that people are starting to bring in hydrogen potentially into their thoughts as well, and in particular in the markets like Benelux, where to try and avoid negative pricing, they're maybe considering putting a test electrolyzer alongside them just to kind of prove up the concepts of being able to avoid negative pricing periods by having a ability to run an electrolyzer and produce hydrogen. Now, I don't think the case is quite there. I think I said in my video, the case is not there for green or blue hydrogen on a competitive basis. So I think some sort of subsidy or some sort of support for low carbon hydrogen would then help bring forward investment in that side, while at the same time might be supporting capacity or the rollout of additional renewables, if they can see that maybe your electricity price is more volatile than previously, but you can lock in some revenue certainty through, for example, hydrogen.
Okay. Lada?
I mean, on the energy efficiency, going back from renewables to energy efficiency, it's very difficult to operate without subsidies. So, it will stay, and especially taking the initiative of the European Union on the renovation wave, on the deep renovation of the buildings will not be, with the deep renovation, we're not getting this energy savings that we need to put any kind of commercial funding in place. If you really do a renovation, and the savings are not that high to pay for any kind of financing, in my view. So we will still need, and will be depending on sort of subsidies for this sector. The same goes, in my view, for the district heating networks, because the part of the biomass or constructing biomass plants operating on the biomass fuel, okay, I'll say renewable fuel, but you if you still need to construct district heating networks, then they will require further subsidies. We looked at the very interesting project, Ivan, in Croatia. And so that's to put it on the commercial basis without getting some funding from the EU Commission, or from the European Structural Fund, it's still remain very difficult. And then in order to get this transition, we have this Green Deal of, and the energy efficiency is the giving us energy savings relatively easily without a lot of effort to construct, but we're still facing the issue of, looking at the other projects like street lighting or constructing street lighting renovation. They don't require, and they usually could be financed on a commercial basis.
Yeah. Let me ask this one final question, because we do have to end a little bit early due to our platform timing allowance. But very quickly, a lot of people have viewed carbon taxes as being a levelizer of the playing field for new types of opportunities and for financing. Do each of you see carbon taxes as being an opportunity or a challenge on project financing? And Ivan, why don't we start with you?
Well, we need to choose. Should we have a carbon tax or should we have European emission system? So we have European emission system. Then we need to improve it if we have this system. If we conclude that it is not enough, then we need to stop this system and to introduce carbon tax on all sectors and equally. So it's not so easy question. It needs to be analyzed, and there's a lot of political issues in it.
Andrew, your thoughts, please.
Well, I do think that carbon tax can run with the EU ETS. I think in the UK, the government at least sets a floor for carbon, and that I think has helped and helped support power pricing. I do think that there's still a little bit too much uncertainty for people to be fully comfortable that the carbon tax or EU ETS on its own is enough of an investment decision for banks. But something that kind of wrote in some legislation or commitment to the carbon price support, I think would really help.
Okay. Lada, you get the final word.
I will say we need a carbon price and we need decision final on this, because I think we're talking about it since 5 years or probably longer, and there's not a lot of movement. So it needs finally to be decision taking, as Ivan says, okay, what's way we're going in Europe, at least for the European Union.
So, panel, thank you very, very much for your discussion today. We greatly appreciate your involvement. Andrew, we know that you had a couple of last minute issues here, but we're glad that you were able to join us. For everybody who's participated in today's panels and discussion, we want to thank you very, very much for your engagement. I can tell you from talking with Costa and a few others, the opportunities exist in 2021 to really take this kind of conversation dynamically further into a digital environment. And we certainly want to try to explore those opportunities. So hopefully the kinds of discussions that we've started today with these panels can be elevated and lead to future opportunities for more interaction. So with that, on behalf of myself as your host, I want to thank everybody's participation today. Please pass along your thoughts on how this discussion went to Costa and the others at the EPG Summit team, so that we can make sure that we keep improving not only our face-to-face conversations, but also our digital conversations. With that, Costa, turn it back over to you.
Well, yeah, I just want to say thank you to everyone. Brian, first of all, your staff, because, we've been involved in this since the beginning of the year. We've conducted the Power Europe TV interview as well as the first one of the series. And we look forward to doing probably TV producer interviews as well with panel members where we can drill deeper into the work that they're doing. Thank all the speakers for providing their self-recorded presentations. They are very valuable because that allows viewers to view the content in their own time, drill deep wherever they find their interest lies, and prioritize which ones they want to see. So we want to continue this maybe on a bi-monthly basis. We'll come up with new themes and invite the advisory board and speaker panel to contribute, or at the very least to participate as delegates and ask questions. Hopefully, we'll be seeing you in most probably Prague, either Prague, Vienna, or Amsterdam this time next year. Famous last words. We said that at the end of the second quarter this year, but it wasn't to be. So despite the difficulties, we've reinvented things a little bit, and I think as having the video resource of our interactions and for the speaker presentations is really valuable for the delegates and for the speakers and for the partners. So thank you all so much for spending the time with us. And we look forward to hosting you again virtually and this time next year in person.
Yes.
Thank you very much.